My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, a podcast where I, your host, try to give you some tips on how you can explain all this weird, wild, crazy conspiracy stuff to the people you love most. Because that's what I've been trying to do for the past 10 years with no success.
I've been telling everybody that our government is shady, but every time I do, my family thinks I'm crazy. The hollow earth, UFOs, aliens invading, fluoride in the water, they spray our skies daily. When I talk about these things, they think I'm crazy. There's no escaping anymore the evil that we're facing. Illuminati, mind control, they're sacrificing babies. The end of days, but anyways, my family thinks I'm crazy.
What, they don't want to listen to you?
No, they don't want to listen. They don't want to hear it. They're just like, oh, here we go, Mark. Off again with your...
Mark being Mark again.
Yeah. So, that's the thing about podcasts is when you're on the air, and it's like therapy, If I can't talk to my family about this stuff, I'll talk to you, Matt, and all our listeners.
You always start your whole podcast.
Yeah. So who are we talking about today, Matt?
They think that I'm crazy. They really think that I'm crazy. They really think that I'm crazy. My family thinks that I'm crazy.
My family, they'll listen to what I have to say and give their opinions, but it doesn't go any further than that.
Psychedelics help too, though. I think
I'm putting in my resignation tomorrow.
she will be free tomorrow, as of tomorrow. That's how I like to look at it. And I will be free.
We have our own way, I guess our own form of spirituality, like you said, Buffalo.
Four monkeys in a cage with a ladder leading up to the top of the cage where there were bananas suspended at the top. One, I'm going to start a GoFundMe for people to contribute to the finances of a movie of you being replaced as the lead in Terminator type situation. Because, dude, just to see you try and save the world, just rolling up blunts while you're like riding on a motorcycle, I really want to see this film. He really hit on a massive idea here that actually is brilliant. So I kind of want to pick that apart a little bit. So whenever we talk about choice and free will, and what I've been saying from the beginning, if you want to feed into this, and a lot of people say this isn't just me, but for my audience, we've been going on this journey for a while. But if you want to feed into that, you're absolutely welcome to, but you don't have to. Like, it's not, it's coercion, but it's still your choice, right? Ultimately. And to the larger scale of this, taking it to where there are people, admittingly, that don't want fuck all to do with anything extra. They want to fit in, they want to fall in line, they want to be a part of that, and that's fine. And what's interesting about it is maybe this is the ultimate kind of like play in your own yard kind of thing with this idea that people in these smart cities, which, yeah, they scare the shit out of you in the Great Reset, and this Klaus Schwab douchebag and all that. They can scare the shit out of you about it if you want to get scared about it. Your problem turns into the reaction of, well, then we have dis-ease, we have these issues in society, we have these divides against all of us, this unauthenticity that we gravitate towards simply because we don't know what we really are while we're here, but someone else does know this, and they're the ones that put the control system in place. And then the solution to that is to then further push this totalitarian thing. So it's like that model, but on a huge scale, having to do with everything. It's not even in these microcosms, because as above, so below. So maybe that idea as above would also be on the biggest scale possible, which is everything.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast Friday Double Feature. This week's Double Feature, we have two swapcasts. One with the False Reality Check podcast and the second with the Expanding Reality podcast. The first conversation, Buffalo and Legs interviewed me about my story, which naturally led to a conversation about synchronicity, energy, and life in general and what is going on in the world today. After that, I spoke with Brandon Thomas on the Expanding Reality podcast about similar things, the collective consciousness, the global parasite that is infecting us all, and what to do about it and how to remain positive. So enjoy this Friday, enjoy your weekend, and I hope you support us on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy Patreon, patreon.com/MFTIC, where every episode is released at least 2 days ahead. So if you join our 2 for $2 club, you'll get all of the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast 2 days ahead of time. If you join for $3 or more, you get the whole scene. And if you join for $5 or more, you get everything. $33, of course, gets you into the Best Friend Book Club. And we do have quite a lot of people who've made their way into the book club. So thank you, all our best friends in the book club. And thank you for joining us here on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. Oh, and one last thing. If you want a spirit animal name, sign up for the Patreon. If you join the Patreon, you will receive a spirit animal name. Thank you for listening and enjoy this Friday double feature. First up, False Reality Check podcast with Buffalo and Legs. And after that, you'll hear from me and Brandon Thomas on the Expanding Reality podcast.
Wonderful Mark from My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. And recently he's working with Michael Wan.
Yes.
Your handbook for the apocalypse.
Big time. And Michael, he's cool.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, that's a fun new show.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it so far. How did you get started with that, if you don't mind sharing?
I don't mind. Thank you again for having me. This is my first time meeting you both, but we've spoken a little bit here and there in Telegram and on the Union of the Unwanted. We were on the same screen, but it's kind of hard. I'm glad we're zoomed in now, because when you're on the Union of the Unwanted, you're talking to like little thumbnail-sized versions of people. So this is awesome. I got started through this, I think, how most people do. You listen to podcasts to the point where you're like, I should do it myself. But, you know, instead of starting my own podcast, I just bothered Sam Tripoli until he had me on his podcast, his premium content. And then, you know, something about me warmed up to him, and he eventually offered me the chance to work for him, you know, and that kind of kicked me in the butt to the point where I'm like, well, I have to start my own podcast. I can't be working for Tinfoil Hat and have nothing to show for myself. So I started my own podcast, and Michael Wan, you know, to connect him into the picture. At that point, I was very aware of him and many other people, learning a lot. You know, I was a delivery guy for Amazon, so I would spend a lot of time listening to podcasts, as people might be doing right now while they're listening to this. You know, you're working your full-time job, and I always saw it as an opportunity to get a free education, because I dropped out of community college, and that kind of bugged me a little bit. And I've always been told by people, oh, you're really smart. What are you doing? And I'm like, oh, I'm a delivery guy, you know? So it was kind of motivation in a way to be like, wow, all of this stuff I'm fascinated by can actually bring me somewhere tangible, rather than it just being a hobby and an interest, right? When I saw how other people were making podcasting a career for themselves, you know, and that wasn't wrapped into my motivation for meeting Sam. Honestly, I just wanted Sam to have this one book, right? This book called The Kabbalion, because at that time he had probably been around like episode 270, 80, the early 300s, somewhere around there. And I was, you know, I listened to the Matt LaCroix interview, which is a big interview. He made it on the you know, Mount Crushmore for the 500th episode. So, you know, Matt LaCroix is awesome, right? Like, everybody loved that interview, and everybody loved like that energy. And I think Tinfoil Hat kind of changed a bit when that interview happened. Like, Sam started warming up to a lot of these things. Like, in the past, they got into that stuff a little bit, but for the most part, it was a deep state conspiracy type show, and Matt LaCroix brought this other element into the picture. And I might not even be doing this if that didn't happen, because Sam kind of got more interested in spirituality at that time too. Obviously, the birth of his twin daughters played a role in that as well. But, you know, I think my motivation for giving him the Kabbalion was like, Sam, you know, you gotta know what the emerald tablets are. Like, because people don't know, like, the 7 Hermetic laws come from the emerald tablets of Thoth, right? And to me, they're talking about all this stuff. I'm like, oh, if only Sam knew the 7 hermetic laws, like this could possibly like make the show, you know, better. Like that's all that was kind of on my mind. As like a super fan, I wanted to maybe like give Sam that book and potentially give him a new outlook on things. And, you know, I show up to a show at New York City. There's hundreds of people there. We're all waiting in line. I took a picture with Sam and Eddie, and then like afterwards everybody's kind of hanging around and I'm lurking around and I'm like, Sam, you know, and he was like, oh, give it to me later, we're going to Creek in the Cave. So I'm like, okay, we're gonna hang out with Sam Tripoli, this is cool. And like these other dudes that were like in line with me, I'd met them, they had a car with them. I had like walked from, you know, who knows how I got there, from my sister's apartment. So going from Manhattan to Long Island City is like a 2-hour walk, right? You know, you gotta, it's not easy. So these guys gave me a ride, and, you know, God bless them if they're out there listening. Those dudes rock, because that's how I ended up kind of meeting Sam. I gave him the book, and things kind of snowballed from there. But in between the time of me giving Sam that book and then actually going on his podcast Zero, I had a moment where I stopped at the Susquehanna River, right? It was just kind of a random occasion. A friend who I had met only a few months prior needed a ride down to Virginia, a state I had never been to before. So I'm like, yeah, I'll give you a ride, especially considering she had offered to pay me. So I drove her down, you know, a little paid vacation to Virginia. And on my way back home, I stopped in 2 places. I stopped in the Washington, D.C. area in the midst of the pandemic or plandemic. And it was, you know, I make that point because it was relatively a ghost town. You know, nobody was out at that time. Everybody was afraid of cooties. So I got to like look at the National Monument and all the cool buildings, and maybe even soak in levels of that energy that you wouldn't normally be able to soak in if the city was kind of vibing and at its, you know, max capacity for a summer, you know, June kind of day. So that was interesting. And then I took that spot and carried that energy with me to the Susquehanna River, where, you know, if you guys are familiar with Michael Wan, you know that that's the name of his website, Susquehanna Alchemy. A huge portion of his research is dedicated to baseline reality. And for him, living near the Susquehanna River, that river is his baseline reality. And, you know, I connected with that in a really weird way, you know, not even thinking about Michael Wan, just knowing that this guy out there had told me that this river was important. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go to this river and see what happens, you know, and I ended up probably throwing some tobacco in the water and saying a prayer and connecting with the elements, because I don't particularly consider myself a part of any religion, but I've found a lot of intelligent things that I've resonated with through Native American and indigenous cultures, and that's part of something a mentor of mine taught me. You know, tobacco is a way to give an offering or a prayer. So I threw the tobacco in the water. I got back in my car, continued on my journey. And then, you know, a couple months later, I have Michael Wan on my podcast, episode 25, and we hit it off. He's like, oh, look, check it out. I just made, you know, this wand. I added something to it. I'm like, dude, I got a wand right here. And I like grabbed my wand. It's actually right there on top of those books right there. But, you know, that little connection kind of created a friendship. And my wayward ways at that time, you know, the beginning of the year, I was just like, go, go, go. I don't want to be home. I was living with my dad at the time, so being home really sucked. I just didn't like it, especially at my age, 26. Now I'm 27, but I didn't like being home at all. So any excuse to like travel was great. And I met this girl who was living in Indiana. She invited me to come to her place and all that. So in between going to Indiana, I would stop at Michael Wan's spot because he lives, you know, kind of on the way, and it's like a 12-hour journey. So I'd rather like cut it in half and stop somewhere. And he generously kind of offered that during our podcast conversation. And I'm not shy when someone offers me, an invitation like that. I'll take them up on it, right? So I stayed at Mike's place, and he gave me one of these sort of skymancy readings. And I'll say it really helped me clear my head at the time, because that person that I was seeing in Indiana, I'm not dating anymore. And the person that I'm in love with now, and who's a huge part of my life, I had known at that time. And that skymancy reading now in hindsight really sharpened the path forward for me, and made me realize like who was important in my life. And so, yeah, it's so interesting how someone can go from being like just someone you hear their voice on a podcast, and then you're in their house, staying in their son's like bed, and like in the extra spare room. And like, it was just so cool to like be accelerated into that world. And yeah, it might sound like, oh wow, Mark's so lucky and whatnot, like how could you go work and do all this stuff and it worked out so great? It's been a lot of hard work. It's been a lot of wasted dollars. It's been a lot of wasted gas, and reading books that maybe felt at the time like there was no point in reading them other than I was fascinated, because like I was just talking to my aunt this afternoon. Most people don't think about the types of things we talk about on our podcast. So when someone asks me like, oh, Mark, how you doing? Same old shit. I'm like, no, not same old shit. Like, I'm like, do you really want to know what I'm thinking about? Like, you sure? Like, do you want to get into this? Like, you don't know what ley lines are. You don't know, like, so it's just going to become a debate, sadly, because you try to explain certain things to people and they're not even with you, like the premise. So now you have to explain the premise, and then they're like questioning the premise, and then you can't even get to what you were thinking about because they won't even entertain this line of thought because they think, they're open-minded until they get hit with something that, questions their reality, and then they're not so open-minded. So finding guys like Michael Wan and Sam Tripoli was a relief for someone as crazy as me, because I just want to talk about this kind of stuff and get into this kind of stuff. And same thing with Tara, like she puts up with my craziness too, and she's really, shown me a lot since us kind of merging in that way. She was going to jump on the podcast. She might jump on. I don't know. I can't push her too far, but it really warms my heart seeing you two do the podcast together, so it's very inspiring. But yeah, long story short, that's kind of how I met Michael Wan. And then, doing what I do with Alt Media United, I've tried really hard, maybe more than I would have, to make these connections and network with people and create a podcast network, which you both are welcome to be a part of as well. And do my best to give people an opportunity to express themselves independently. Because I've seen, just from being a fan of podcasts, how like influence from a network can change a show, right? I used to be a fan of Stuff They Don't Want You to Know, which is like really like mainstream conspiracy. Like it might as well be on PBS. It's not anything crazy, right?
So true.
Like it's interesting stuff for someone who's new to all of this. And there was a time when their shows were very red pill, like if we want to use that term. And that was when I started listening. Then I eventually had to wake up and be like, oh, these guys are on to something. And it's not anything that I believe in. It's probably warped by a guy like Marshall Brain, whoever he is, and how stuff works is its own entity. But I found open-minded people. I found, this kind of voice in a sea of information. And I'd like to help those people, because I know how hard the work can be from this perspective of like putting stuff together and having a conversation and researching and all that. Like, marketing your podcast and figuring out which platform you need to be on to not get censored and all those other little ins and outs. Like sometimes that catches up with you, and then what happened to Tripoli happens to you, where all of a sudden, 4 years of hard work just gets censored off YouTube for good, and like obviously he could take a hit like that because he is Tripoli. He's doing great. He's, didn't need YouTube. He didn't create himself with YouTube. It was just a byproduct of his success to have that platform as an outlet. But I think folks in our position where we have, sort of the idea that we're going to be an entrepreneur at this, we want to know that this is going to be something that's going to sustain us legitimately, and we're not going to wake up one morning and our, bread and butter is rotting, between our fingertips. We got to maintain that. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting too metaphorical, but take it away, folks. I've been talking so much here. You guys have so much energy.
No, Mark, it's all good.
That was so, I didn't know all that of how you connected with Sam. And that was something I always wanted to know, because I always hear, I always hear your name mentioned on Tinfoil. I always hear your name. I always hear Mark's scheduling, Mark's doing this. And so it was good to kind of put it all together and how you met with Michael Wan, and especially because we like Michael Wan too. I mean, we love Sam. I think the reason why we're on Rockfin is obviously because of Sam, and it's crazy how the direction that you pointed him and Matt LaCroix and everybody pointing him in the spiritual way. And I think it was for the better. And like you said, when Ghost and Ninja got born, it brought everything together, and now the full bloom of Sam Tripoli has come out, and he is just abundant like crazy, and he is just handing it out to people like, come aboard, I'll help you. Let's do this together. Yeah. And you with Alt Media United, and yes, we would love to be a part of Alt Media United. It's been crazy the way we've experienced all the love from the community coming out and talking about our life and getting interesting takes from people. It's like, my God, where were you guys my whole life? Like this was the community I've been looking for. Right. And I haven't experienced that, even with the people who I thought were the closest friends of mine who are now shutting me out of their life. I haven't experienced that with those people. And to me, it's crazy that some of these people we've never even met. We've never even been in the same room. And I'm like, oh yeah, we should totally come visit us, like come stay and like, let's take care of each other. Yeah. It's weird.
And Mike and I just mentioned this on episode 7 of your handbook for the apocalypse, that like, we're here, we found our tribe, and that's kind of the idea behind the show is like, okay, we're all part of this like awakening, if we're going to use that definition of the word apocalypse. So let's like kind of show people how we're guiding our way through it. We're not going to create the, master text handbook, but it's our handbook. Now maybe it could be yours too, right? By tuning into the show. So, and I will say, maybe I forgot kind of another point is like, when I was listening to podcasts and I kind of saw how fragile it could be, in the sense of like, the guys from the Stuff They Don't Want You to Know podcast at one point had good intentions and then maybe got derailed because of financial interests, in the sense that like, then another person comes into the team and then the influences change, and then, the direction takes, so I've always found, well, I don't even want to say I'll start differently. I'll say, when I was at that point, when I was just listening to podcasts, I thought, all right, I need to support this content. So, and of course I was interested in the premium content, but there was plenty of shows that, didn't really have much premium content that I would just support anyways, like the Higher Side Chats, that's a no brainer. You got to have the second hour, like give Greg $8 a month. You're not gonna regret it, right? Same thing with Tripoli. Like, I've been supporting Tripoli since he was on Patreon, and that's how I even got to like talk to him, because I could have just been hitting him up as some random guy on Instagram. I don't know. Instead, I was a guy on his Patreon sending him direct messages like, hey, dude, I'm helping you out with this. Like, maybe you'll take me a little more seriously. Not that I like deserved anything or anything like that, but that's the kind of approach I took. Like, karmically, I'm going to give back to this content because it's serving a purpose for me. I should help them out and help them maintain this, because I didn't want to see any of those shows end. And, now I'm lucky enough to have people supporting me on a Patreon I created, right? And looking for other options. Rockfin is one of them, right? Like you guys said, really cool to be on there. Most of us wouldn't be on there if Sam didn't get kind of like asked to be a part of it. And that was big for me too, because he only created 0 because he needed another show to do for Rockfin, right? And that was kind of where he asked me to be on for episode 3. And then he asked me like, hey, do you know who else I should have on the show? And I didn't like send him one suggestion, guys. I sent him like 30 people. Like I sent him an email with like name, like when they were born, what they talk about, you know, like with their email, you know. So I showed him like, not that I even thought that he was going to like ask me to work for him. I just sent him that because I'm like, these are all the people I want to see you talk to. You know, that was it. There was no like resume involved with me working with Sam. Sam was just like, oh shit, okay, you might be the right guy for this. And then, you know, with the quality and the caliber of people I was booking on Zero, he was like, oh, maybe we should have you booking for Tinfoil Hat as well. And, you know, I totally, you know, love that opportunity, but at the same time, he doesn't pay me, you know, a lot. He doesn't pay me enough to like live off of. So there's the incentive to start my own podcast cooperative, work with other podcasters, and really find my space in this realm, while still recognizing like, hey, I'm pretty lucky. Like the opportunity I was given by Sam is pretty, you know, rare, and I want to be able to give back immediately, you know, and start a cooperative. And another guy who was huge for me was Alex Sakaris, like with the Skeptico podcast. I had him on my show for episode 7, and we started working together in that way as a booker. He was impressed by some of the things that we had talked about. And then that evolved into him basically funding Alt Media United's beginning. You know, now he's kind of stepped back and doesn't pay me anymore, but he pays for the website to exist, and I do the rest, you know, and that's kind of a mutually beneficial thing because his podcast is a part of it, and he's networked with a lot of people in the cooperative since. So that's a little bit of like the backstory too, and that's, you know, I'm really grateful you guys even asked about that because it is nice to talk about that. I don't like to talk about that kind of stuff on my show. I try to make it more about the guests, but I don't want there to be any mystery about this kind of stuff. Like, I'm just a normal dude who grew up in Connecticut, like with a huge income gap over here, you know, like not on the right end of that income gap. And I'm just trying to build my way up in a job that doesn't completely suck my soul from me, you know, and I've always been so against the grain that I didn't really fit into most jobs. I mean, I smoke so much weed that like I can't get hired at most jobs. So that's kind of prevented me from going into that mainstream world as much as I could have, right? And maybe been more of what my family expected me to be. And, you know, that brings me back to why the name of my show is so true, because, you know, my family thinks I'm like a crazy pothead who's just reading a bunch of like magic books, you know, like they don't get it. Like they love me, they support me, and they're proud of me when I accomplish something, but they're not like on board with half of the things or even 70% of the things that I talk about or believe in, and I accept them for that.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat too. Like my family, they'll listen to what I have to say and give their opinions, but it doesn't go any further than that, you know. It's just like, now
do you guys think, because we must all be around the same age, I imagine, like, do you think it's our internet generation, if we're even going to use that term? Like, do you think it's like, because, you know, I was talking to Alex today on the show, and he's in his 50s, I think. I don't want to age him, but I think that's how old he is. And he was like, you know, he pushes back, and people can listen to that interview when it comes out and see exactly what I mean. But I was kind of pointing some things out, and he was like, well, Mark, that's relative. Like, that's relative bullshit. Like, this didn't exist when I was a kid. Like, this whole idea that, all truth is relative and what's true for you might not be true for them. Like, shouldn't we agree that there's a common truth, you know? And I think that's what motivates me in conspiracy, is I think like there is a common truth, and for the most part, most people are blind to it. Like, I mean, and that's why explaining things to our families can be so weird, because they're not seeing the same world we're seeing, you know? And maybe the internet's given us larger eyes through which to see the world in that way.
I would agree with that. And just our connection too, like we're able to connect through the internet. We're able to connect with cell phones, you know, it used to just be landlines and letters. Now we have email. We're more connected now, and we're able to communicate ideas and look up certain things that we're interested in much easier. Yeah, I would think that's a big factor for sure.
Psychedelics help too, though. I think, because I don't want to assume, but I'm going to make an assumption. We've all experienced some sort of psychedelic
plant medicine.
Yeah. And I would make the assumption that a lot of people in our parents' generation haven't, or even if they have, it freaked them out and they never want to do it again because they fought it. And sometimes, at least in my experience, when you fight it, you're going to have a bad time. Like, you're going to have a really bad time. You need to go with it and let it teach you. And that's the thing, is for them to accept knowledge from a plant or a fungus is like, oh, but that's not a point of authority. Like, that's not an authority figure. So is that real knowledge, or are you opening the door to something?
Yeah.
Right.
But we all agree that there is a God, and there is source. In my family, we may disagree that the route to connect to God, they believe, go to church, religion. That's the only route. When in my mind, I'm like, no, there's many ways you can connect.
Yeah. God's everywhere.
Yeah.
You can connect any way.
Well,
you form your own spirituality.
And I don't know if this is true for your experiences, but for me, church turned me off to any idea of God. Like, going to church, I did not feel was a spiritual process at all. I was not embraced. And that could just be like every other factor that was also going on in my life at that point in time, and not the church's total fault. But it was a little odd to, see how, unenlightened my grandparents were, as respectful as I can be in saying that. They are very good people, but they were not enlightened in the sense of like spirituality. But they, swore by this church and, swore by its like teachings, yet, for the most part, they were pretty normal people. They weren't pious. They weren't like abstinent. They weren't, none of these things. It wasn't a strict upbringing, but certain words and certain like things and ideas were definitely like, oh no, we don't talk about that, we don't believe in that, we believe in God. So there was immediately from a young age like this idea of like, oh, you guys are just playing along with this game, and this funky looking dude on stage right here in a green robe is waving this golden scepter around, and some urn full of smoke. It was just all unexplained things, and everyone was just like, yep, this is it, we're all on board. You don't see it? Why don't you see it? So that made me look towards things that were more real, more tangible, nature, the things around me, and unfortunately culture, right? Because I'm not perfect. I was predictive programmed my whole life and had to like work my way out of it in reverse. And now, like, thanks to the books and thanks to the podcasts, I have maybe a more clear vision towards what's out there that can be found and what can be seen, rather than maybe just what the TV limits us to believe is real. And that was huge for me, because I realized like, oh, a lot of people are just living through these like themes and archetypes that we're given through the television. I kind of always liked examining what I was watching on TV, and not always, sometimes I would just check out. But at the same time, like, there were certain things going on in that time in my life that then inspired me around maybe 15 or 16 to smoke weed for the first time. And that's what brought me back to what I would say is like a real perspective. Like, the slate was wiped clean, and like a child sees the world, I was able to see the world at the age of 16, like with new, fresh eyes. And then you start from there, and that's when I would say I came back to spirituality from when I departed at that young age and writing off church and not believing in God, and now I have a stronger sense of a creator and creation and trying to connect with that. But at the same time, like, I I don't know. I mean, I just talked to Todd Armstrong. That's why I was late. I apologize. He was going on a bit, and he was, giving us a very Christian message and touching on some things that were like chakras and kundalini, and that's all a part of Christianity too, if you go far enough back. But it's just odd to see now in this conspiracy world how people with that lens of like super hyper religious can still be in our open-minded kind of frequency of discussing Nephilim, but they do tend to put it in those two camps of like, well, it's either the authority of good or the authority of evil. But it's that kind of authority thing that you and I are all sort of resonating here on.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you think that the lines are blurring a little bit? Because I notice a lot more people in our community they're either really spiritual or they're like really Christian, but everybody's kind of on that same frequency, like you said, where they're open-minded and they're willing to discuss it, open ideas and all that kind of stuff. But it seems like the community is getting bigger. Do you think that's as a result of this awakening and we're just opening up together?
Yeah.
Or do you think that we're all seeing each other's sides a little bit more?
Yeah, I think I have to keep in mind, like where I live, there's more of a like, I don't know what the proper term for it would be, but it's like a weekend Christianity where like people are only religious on the weekends, like on Sunday and like on holidays, they're not like, they're not living a very religious life per se. They're living more of a secular life while still participating in those religious rituals for whatever reason. Whereas there's a huge part of the country that I haven't been to much where religion is everything, Midwest, South. I mean, I can't say I've experienced those places, but from what I've gathered and from the people that have come from there to here, it seems like it's a different vibe. So with that point in mind, absolutely, I think we're all waking up and using the cultural references that we're most familiar with to explain the world around us, and that's kind of like, why I don't shy away from a conversation with Todd, because I'm not totally sold that I'm right. Maybe he's right. Maybe there is Jesus as he describes it and God as he describes it. I don't dismiss either of those ideas. I just don't describe them the same way he does,
Exactly. Yeah, we have our own way, I guess our own form of spirituality, like you said,
Yeah.
Buffalo. Yeah, that's fascinating. I wanted to ask your opinion. What is a book that you think everyone should read?
Well, I think, I say this to people on the Telegram. Join the Telegram chat if you guys want to join the family. But the Telegram, I just got a couple asks about that same question, like what books should we read? And it's like, first of all, if you're going to be reading anything, you gotta want to read it. I mean, it's not always easy to commit to a whole book. Fiction tends to be easier for people because you can like live in that world, and it's an escape from your life. You escape into fiction, and you escape into this like visualization that you create in your mind. And there might still be non-fictional aspects to a fiction story, but I think people in general are more comfortable with fiction in long bursts and nonfiction in short bursts. So why I make this disclaimer, it's like you have to really be motivated to want to read like some of these books. So if I tell you, oh yeah, buy, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, and then you buy an 800-page book, it's going to sit on your shelf. Yeah, it's going to sit on your shelf for a while unless you're pretty motivated to read it, So, and a book like that I recommend because you don't have to read it from start to finish. You can read it, in pieces and find a chapter that you like, are most interested in. And that's something I do too. Like I'm not extremely strict with my method of researching. Sometimes I'll have multiple books open at once, just trying to kind of understand a theme. So with that being said, I'll recommend The Secret History of the World by Mark Booth. And then I'm looking over my shoulder to find the title of whatever book calls to me. I would say like anything on the law of attraction is going to help you understand how you fit into the world a little better. And this goes to my bigger point, which I want to make, is that I can't recommend the right book for anybody. You have to be your own guide and let your intuition guide you. So if you have the opportunity and you live in an area where there's used bookstores, that would be the first place you need to go. Just look around, go straight towards the occult metaphysical section. It's usually not a big section, unless you're in like Salem, Massachusetts or something, and it's like a tourist attraction for that type of stuff. But it's generally kind of a specialist sort of thing. Like crystal shops sometimes will have like a large book section in them as well. So be creative and look for this type of book. Don't go to like a Barnes and Noble and wonder why you're kind of limited and it's all called self-transformation for whatever reason. I don't really appreciate that title, Barnes and Noble, but either way, go to a bookstore and use your intuition and let a book call to you, because there's going to be the right book that calls to you for whatever esoteric or occult information you may need at that time in your life. Like for me, it was a lot of books. I just kept like getting more and more and more and more, wanting more, because I was like never really satisfied with just one explanation for something. So I can't really, give that good of a recommendation, but I will say, because people ask me that a lot, I'm going to start a book club in the Patreon. And since the copyright laws are kind of weird and I don't want to get in trouble with that whole thing, I'm not going to narrate books, but I might do like quick commentary on like these books. But these books are all copyright. They're all after the date of 1923 and have a 70-year copyright on them. So we can't like verbatim read from those books, but we can kind of commentate on them. And then why I even bring all that nonsense up is because any book written before 1923 or within the public domain is free for anyone to translate, recite, reprint, however you want to do it. So that's where I'm going to do on the book club, is go back into some of those old books, read them through, and then explain sort of what I think of what we just read together. Because I don't want to like rip off people's work and read from books that are copyright. Like that'd be like somebody playing a whole half an hour of my podcast on their podcast and then talking about it. It's just weird.
That's so true. That's such a good idea. I really like that.
Thank you.
We're gonna have to check that out.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not my idea. There's plenty of people who do podcasts about books, and I've noticed that they do them with public domain books for that reason. So you guys are free to do it as well. There's 6,000 something books on the Gutenberg.com, I think, for Gutenberg Project or something like that. So it's all out there if you guys look up like public domain books. And yeah, I think together as a podcast collective, if we're all looking into this kind of stuff, more information will come to the fray. So as much as I want to take that compliment for that idea, it's like, no, like everybody should do it. It's not my idea. Let's all do this together,
For sure. Yeah, we're going to have plenty of time on our hands in the very near future. So
I hear, yeah, that's exciting.
It's exciting and scary, but you know what? It's hard for me because, I've been sold on that corporate mentality. It's like an abusive relationship, being a corporate employee, because that company just like, they'll just toss you away. Even if you work 7 years, hard work, and you're told, yeah, that's what you got to do. You got to go to college, get a job, do your work. But I'm over it. I'm done.
Yeah, we're going through. So for people who don't know, who are listening to the show, today was it today or is it tomorrow?
For me, I'm putting in my resignation tomorrow.
So she will be free tomorrow, as of tomorrow. That's how I like to look at it. And I will be free as of, if they don't get rid of me, I'm going to hand my resignation in on Friday.
Wow.
So yeah, we're out.
Yeah,
we're going to Idaho.
And yeah, I heard about that. That's awesome. Owen Benjamin has a lot of good things to say about Idaho. He was just on Tinfoil, and he's going to be on my show soon. We got to work out a time.
Nice.
But yeah, definitely hear good things about Idaho as far as freedom and as far as living off the land. I'm totally into that. I mean, you know, I don't think people can do it alone. I definitely encourage you guys to get into a community as soon as you settle in and whatnot, because that's the thing, you know, winters are hard. You want to be able to trade with people and have people you might be able to rely on in a, you know, potentially dangerous situation. I mean, I don't know where you guys are at now, but where I live, it gets pretty cold in the winter, but never like, I'm sure it doesn't get Idaho cold where you're like trapped in your house for multiple days. But you know, it's definitely something that Tara and I have been talking about, is like, oh, maybe we should go somewhere really rural and, you know, we can work from our computers. And as long as we're staying connected, you know, we can make a life for ourselves outside of the system. It's just, I think that's something that everyone should try to do if you're interested in this type of content. It's definitely not just for entertainment. It's because you see the world and you want to either change it or change your life to better match like the bigger picture and fitting within it. And that's the best thing you can do, like counter economics, you know, make a change in your own life and you create that ripple effect. And I think the more people that make that change that you guys did, and it might be scary at first, you know, you're leaping into the unknown, but if you embrace it, you know, I think it could work out in exponential ways. You know, it certainly it has for me over a period of time since quitting Amazon. You know, I was a delivery driver and I didn't, you know, I've always been of the motto, like, you don't quit a job until you have a better job lined up, because you don't want to be a bum and you don't want to be homeless and all that. But, you know, I didn't really do that. I had an opportunity to work with Sam, but that's not really, if we're looking at things from a chronological order, I didn't know that was a possibility in a way. Like it was just like I'd been on his show and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to work Lyft, because Lyft was like make your own hours, you know? So I did that for a little while too after Amazon. And then, yeah, somewhere along the line, you know, it lined up. And I think I've done the preparation for that opportunity and like aligned with that, you know? So I'm sure you guys have very similar things going on where you're aligning towards this new life and this new mission that you're embarking on. You know, things are probably, like you said before with the friends, like I had the same thing happen. Once you take this radical change into something that's more real, some of your friends don't follow you. You know, they're like, no, I'm more comfortable living in this old world, and I don't see the new world you're in. Or they're cool and they're like, oh, I respect that you're in this new world, but I'm not giving up what I got over here. So that's a sacrifice you definitely have to make. But I'll tell you what, you know, this is a friendship forming right here, and I've made many friendships over the computer thanks to podcasting now. So, and like you know, like I talked about before, I went out, met Michael Wan. Now that relationship is more of a friendship and less of like a digital companionship, you know, so to speak. But Micah Dank, add him to the list. I had dinner with him and his brother and his niece in Long Island. That was fun, Tara and I. And then let's see, who else have I met in real life? Alex Sakaris from the Skeptico podcast. He met us this summer. And then obviously Sam Tripoli, the man, I've hung out with him a couple times. And then Mike Romanelli is another great friend that I've made. Bruce DeTorres, guest on my show. I gave him a ride to Mike Romanelli's podcast studio, and we podcasted there in person. So, and Tommy G, who I don't have any relationship with him, but people seem to like him, and I was in the same room as him, folks. So there's a lot of real fun and real cool people out there that I've met through podcasting, and it's not limited to the podcast, which is, you know, I'll say is very different from the world I was in a sense, because like a lot of the guys I did my podcast with, they're cool. I like them. I still love them and respect them, but they're very heavily into video games. And I only bring this up because of this point of like, yes, you're connecting with people in the outside world when you play a video game, but it stays in cyberspace. It very rarely, in my experience, translates to the real world. You know, like you might be friends with somebody in a game, but then you go and hang out with them and all you're talking about is gaming. You know, like I hung out with people who were my friends before they got so sucked into that world, and I get really like, you know, I can be kind of blunt. Like if I'm not interested, like you see it on my face, you know? So there were times where I'm just like, yeah, maybe I should find new friends, because there's, you know, we used to have things in common, but now we don't, because I stopped playing those video games. You know, I stopped going to that cyber world and spending time there, which, you know, could benefit some people, but I felt like it was wasting my time. That's just my opinion. I'm not, you know, because again, I respect those guys and they choose to do that with their time, you know, it's totally valid. But at the same time, it kind of hurts me because I'm like, oh, you guys were into conspiracies. Like, don't you know that that's a conspiracy? Like you're being like absorbed into cyberspace with these video games. I don't know.
That's crazy. Yeah, I always do that with people, and I'm trying my best to have patience where you see, like, people will understand certain conspiracies and they'll be like, yeah, the government puts us into war. Yeah, you know, they lie to us. But they're like, put your mask on. And it's
right.
It like they don't like link the two. It's so weird. And it makes me really like angry, and I have to just.
Well, you know what's good about what you just said though? Because I don't think people would have that impression of war if it wasn't for 9/11, you know, and maybe we can discuss this because I'm just Guy. What I say is open for debate, but it feels like there's this really strong patriotism that got beat so hard into people after 9/11 that a lot of people were like, oh, wow, yeah, that was and they might not go rabbit hole far and say like it was a planned event and it was a conspiracy theory, but like you just pointed out, they can recognize that war is not what they say it is on a mass level, and it's not always engaged in just to protect people. And as a matter of fact, it's probably never been used that way. So that's kind of where I stand on that whole thing. But I wonder if this whole mask incident and the whole pandemic could possibly push people towards radical health in that way, like where, you know, going through this whole thing, what if it ends the whole epidemic? Because we've been living in the age of the epidemic. This isn't the first epidemic. I mean, there's been epidemics ever since, you know, curiously enough, ever since we've had an electrical grid. I wonder why the seasonal flu is connected to
right?
the history of electricity. That's so strange. But, you know, getting back to the real and baseline reality and what Michael Wan talks about and what you guys are doing by going to a rural place like that, that's what I think people are getting keen to, and maybe will, just as far as the pendulum has swung this way in the crazy world, we're going to go the opposite direction into harmony with nature, you know, and I hope that happens, because it seems to me like that's the case. I mean, I'm wearing freaking underwear from Matt Landman right now, protecting me from the EMF on the computer. So like there's serious things going on. Like just because I'm doing the podcast here, don't get it twisted, folks. I'm taking precautions as much as I possibly can, but I also feel like I'm sacrificing a little bit of myself to help wake people up, because for whatever reason, this is what I like to do. But, you know, like, we do need to recognize that might be just as much of a culprit as any other thing. I forgot how I got onto that tangent, but the age of the epidemic too. It's like, yeah, like these things have been happening over and over, you know, and I think people are going to wise up, because they're just using the same tricks they used 100 years ago with the whole polio thing. And look what happened there. Like, people are shorter as an average. The height has gone down, right? We can get into some of the other things that have happened, but like that's super controversial. I've had Dr. Andrew Wakefield on my podcast talking about some of the links he's made with the, the jab and all of the really harmful consequences of taking that form of experimental, I don't want to call it medicine, but experimental whatever, you're the experiment. Let's just put it that way. But yeah, so not to go into that whole realm, because my point being is like, it's not going to get worse than this from what I've gathered. And I don't know if you guys stay up on Tinfoil Hat, but I listen to every episode. I have to. After this, I'm going to listen to the newest episode with Nick Hinton. But Cliff High was just on the show, and he talked to Sam about his WebBot predictive programming device that I was trying to explain this to Tara, and I can hardly understand it. So I'll do my best here. But, his WebBots crawl the internet. Let's say the internet's like this stream, right, of all this pieces of information, and it, records to the best of the bot's abilities what's happening on the internet, runs it through some algorithm, and this guy, Cliff, can see the information coming through the internet and kind of, based on these algorithms he's created over the past 20, 30 years, predict certain things and, take that for what it is. He said it, not me, but his predictions seemed to say that things were going to get better. And I don't know. That's the kind of vibe I want to lean towards. We can talk about the whole range of things, but I like to end on a good note. Not that we're ending, but you know what I mean? When we're thinking about what's going on in the world, I think my show and your show, what we try to do is leave people with a positive feeling and inspired, not black-pilled, as some podcasts might name themselves. But that's a topic for a different day.
For sure. That's so interesting you bring that up. In our Telegram chat, Andy from the Deep Share podcast, he sent us a video.
Also part of All Media United.
He is, yes. He posted a video related to Project Looking Glass, and it's an interview. I don't know, you don't know if it's real or not, but it's a very positive message. But it's ex-military guy talking about Project Looking Glass and how every time they tried to see into the future, it all pointed to everyone waking up, and the elite parasite class, whatever you want to call them, basically failing. And that's kind of why they got rid of that whole Project Looking Glass, because they weren't seeing what they wanted. No matter what, every scenario, every choice that they put forth, it all led to us waking up and winning.
I didn't see that, but I love the point you're making there, and it's definitely in concert with what I said. And I think, beyond that, they've tried to weaponize everything, right, about life in a way. That's their job as the CIA. They're trying to figure out how to weaponize everything. And I think what they found there, and that maybe, if whether true or not, it indicates to me that you can't use light for dark purposes. That's just the way it is, So we as astral beings, we are given that ability, and it's not given freely. It comes with dedication and going through those processes of initiation, hence the rites of passages that you can still find in indigenous cultures, and you find them in secret societies and more modern cultures. But the rites of passage teach us how to use those skills that we all innately have, the ability to use our astral body. And from what I've gleaned from people who maybe have been in secret societies or shared or written about that kind of stuff, they're doing the same thing, but they're adding a level of hierarchy to it. So certain people go into the astral realm, and then the new guys, they go into the astral realm, but they're bullied, in the sense that you're not fully aware of your abilities in there, and that's to your disadvantage when you're an adept. You come into the astral realm as a new guy, and the older guys rough you up and try to I don't know, for worse or for better, I don't know, because I've never gone through anything like that. But it seems to me and this was kind of an off the air conversation with someone who was just on Tinfoil Hat, where we were getting into like what is going on that astral realm. And, you know, it seems to me like they have people in that realm who have, you know, taken control over it, we'll say, or at least that was the fear that this person had. So like when you're dreaming, there are like dream agents who are watching you too. And like, I don't know how much of that I believe in, because like what you're saying, it's like you can't weaponize things like that. Like that's not, it's just the way it is. Like you can't start a fire with a wet log, you know. Water is the opposite of fire. It's just the way it is, right? So I don't know, you know, but I'll say that everything I've experienced with spirituality and plant medicine has been pretty beneficial to me, because I've taken the cautious, moderate route. Like I've done mushrooms and acid maybe in larger doses, but not like with frequency, you know, with big breaks in between. And like cannabis probably is what I use the most, but I'm always smoking with tobacco. And it's interesting because like tobacco has this religious sacred connotation of warding off evil spirits, right? So, you know, I'm reading all this stuff about Crowley, I'm reading all this weird stuff, but I'm also like, I don't know, in a way protecting myself or giving myself a shield from those negative forces that are real. Like you can weaponize those negative forces, but it's the same concept of like, you know, a light cannot be extinguished by darkness. You know what I mean? It's the other way around only, right? As soon as you turn a light on, the dark vanishes, right? So I think that's kind of what we're dealing with, is when we turn on that inner light, our soul's light, the forces of negativity have already lost. They can only manipulate us into keeping our light off. They can't like mess with us once our light's on. So that's the game we're playing here with like those weaponized astral realms. Is like, if you're telling me that they're turning their light on and then harming people, that doesn't sound like it's going to last very long, because they're failing at the mission. They're failing at becoming ascended. They're, you know, that's not what those things are intended for. And, you know, that's why I think secret societies, to my earlier point, are kind of worthless too, in a sense, even though in the past they were keepers of information and that was important. Now it's like there are no secrets. Everything's open. So what are they doing? They're like, you know, controlling you. No matter how you put it, they're controlling you. And unless you rise to the top of that organization, you're not in control of your own will and your experiences with that astral realm or wherever else they help you become aware of. And that's why, again, like my point before, I've always kind of looked at indigenous cultures with more reverence, because they're always putting it on you. Like if you are going to do one of these rites of passages, you're going out on your own, and then it's up to you to take that learning and integrate it into whatever you become in life. You know, there's no like, okay, you passed the first test, now the second test comes up. Like there's no, it's like a couple tests, but there's a final point. It seems to me like with these secret societies, they've gamed it so you're just like, you know, going up this like back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and never actually reaching that ascension that we're all, you know, it's our birthright. And we live in this world where there's those negative forces that are like trying to keep our lights off. And as soon as we turn the light on, that's when the process starts. And anything that you do that's negative diminishes your light and brings you back down. You know, it's kind of like, I don't know. And maybe this was really far off from our original point, but that's what you get from the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy false reality check swapcast.
I'm loving this.
No,
Are you
this
kidding
is
me?
great.
It's so interesting. You refer to tobacco as a spiritual medicine, and they totally inverted that shit on us. You know,
Yeah.
it's
They're like, if you smoke, you're going to get cancer.
like I've never really looked into tobacco at all and considered it some sacred plant medicine. I'm really interested now into looking into it more,
Yeah.
because for the fact that it was totally inverted. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
it's crazy that like this, is that part of their process? Is it part of their process to take something and then just invert it to make it so that we never really know what's going on?
Right.
That has to be, right?
Well, and I think, people would call that maybe alchemy, but yeah, inversion. I mean, Sam said it a bunch on the show when certain guests are on and certain topics are being discussed. But when it comes to tobacco specifically, I mean, it's a new world plant in the sense that it didn't exist in the quote unquote old world, right? Not true, because the Egyptians have tobacco in some of their tombs, but that's a conversation for a different story. If we're gonna just maybe pretend like the official narrative is even halfway true for a second, tobacco is considered an old world plant, right? So new world plant, so very different from old world plants like cannabis, which is considered an old world plant, grows in Asia, grows in Africa, grows pretty much anywhere. But tobacco is particular to North America, and I didn't start smoking tobacco for any like sacred reason. Hold on. I just dropped my lighter, speaking of smoking. So I didn't start smoking tobacco for any sacred reason, like I'm not trying to blow smoke up my, so to speak, but like I just smoked it because that's what my peers were smoking out of, blunts, hip hop music. Like this is the culture that I kind of got into when I started smoking. And it wasn't until a couple years later that, because I had pipes and bongs and I didn't just like only smoke blunts, but it wasn't a couple years later, maybe when I was like 19 or so, I was in community college and I met a guy who is an indigenous person from Arizona. He's part of a Pueblo tribe, part of that culture. And he basically put it to me like, cannabis is the feminine and tobacco is the masculine. So to me, that, boom, yin yang, like, and I, at that point in my life, loved, Jeet Kune Do and really all things Eastern philosophy, just very curious about all that stuff. And it just made sense and everything clicked, and I've only smoked that way ever since. So in that way, yeah, maybe it's helped me, but in the side of it being sacred, yeah, that was also made very clear. This person, Amos, he taught me basically, like I said earlier, that you can use tobacco to pray. You give it as an offering, you light it, keeps, he didn't talk about the keeping evil spirits away thing. That's something that, comes from a book. So I tend to take a big grain of salt when it comes to like things written about Native Americans, because there's a lot of crap written about Native Americans. But when it comes to like the corroboration where he, told me a bunch of things and then I read something parallel to it in a book, now I have a little more trust in that information. So, not that I've like done any exorcisms or anything, but I would say I've walked a pretty like clean path in the sense that like I've been able to manifest things and recognize when I was manifesting negative things and stop manifesting those negative things. And cannabis and tobacco have been an ally in that sense. And I use that term from the book Carlos Castaneda's Teachings of Don Juan. And for people who want to be super analytical and skeptical like that book, definitely read it. But, keep in mind, if you go and read a little further, you'll find out that guy, Carlos Castaneda, ended up being a cult leader in the end of his life. So, some of his later books might not be as good as the first one. And also people have gone in and said like, oh, well, it's all fictional. But I was just talking to a guy named Corey Daniels who lives in Arizona, and that's where a large part of the book takes place. And he said, it is true that Don Juan didn't exist and the book is kind of fictional, but this man, Carlos Castaneda, was going around to all the different groups of people and taking what he was learning from doing his anthropology work and writing it into that fictional narrative and using Don Juan to personify like this teacher, because there wasn't a man like that for him to like learn everything from. He was kind of piecing it together from different people. So it was interesting to like, be reading that book in my life at that same time that Amos kind of came into my life, right? So there's always been that level of synchronicity. And that's why I also tell people, like, go and look in a bookstore yourself, because my synchronicities are for me and yours are for you. And that's kind of how you can have a greater connection with the world around you. And when you notice those kind of connections forming, you might consider going down that path a little further. Now, that might not always be true. I think there is a component of like manipulated synchronicity. We talked about that on your handbook for the apocalypse. But I think if you're connected to your heart and your intentions are good and you care about giving back to the world in whatever way happens for you, because everybody's got their own gift to give, you know? So I think if you're centered in that, there's not a chance that those negative forces can get to you, and there's not a chance that your synchronicities can be manipulated because you're following your higher self. And it's really cool that, you know, we're resonating on all this together, because this is the kind of thing that people are going to hear and then they'll resonate with it. And it has that fractaling effect where now, you know, 3 people affected 30 people who then affect 300 people who then affect 3,000 people. And it might just be like we put a smile on their face by having this conversation, and then they put a smile on someone else's face. I mean, that's something there, right? That's magic, right? And that's what books did for me in a way. Podcasts do that for many of us, and I'm sure it did it for you guys as well. But that's why I'm like just kind of happy to get into this whole thing, because before podcasting, I was just crazy talking about this stuff to people who had no idea what any of it meant.
Right. Just talking to the dog, you know?
Might as well be. Yeah.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I love that. Yeah. You blew my mind with the whole feminine, cannabis is the feminine, tobacco is the masculine. That makes so much sense, because the flower itself is the female part, right? When and that makes so much sense. I get it. And I'm almost done with your Corey Daniels episode. I love that conversation and his connection to the desert.
Yeah, he's really awesome.
Really cool guy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. We're going to the desert tomorrow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
We are.
Yeah.
Right on. Well, I did pull another book off the shelf just to recommend it to you guys, since you asked at the beginning. This book, for anybody who smokes weed, Liber 420, Cannabis, Magical Herbs, and the Occult. It's a big book, but it's definitely a big read. It covers a lot of topics, and I've had Chris on the show. People can go to his website. I think it's pantagruelian.com, or maybe that's his email. Oh, it's cannabisculture.com, I think. Let's just go with that. But Chris is really cool, and he is like the expert at the history of cannabis, and he said a very similar thing about, you know, cannabis being connected to the divine feminine, and throughout history, different cultures have symbolized it in that way. So when you see that universality to something, where like an indigenous culture in North America has a reflected view in the Aboriginal culture in Australia, and then that's reflected in India, and that's reflected in Japan, and you know, you see these kind of things. To me, that's what I look for, and that's why before I said, like, I don't really have a spiritual denomination. I'm just, you know, interested in everything and figuring it all out in a way as much as I possibly can as one person. But to make that other point, thanks to podcasting, I don't have to do it alone now. You know, people can email me or get in touch with me on Instagram, the Telegram, join the Patreon, where I'll probably listen to you a little more than I would in any of those other places. But, you know, like, if you get what I'm saying, we're all crowdsourcing this stuff together and working on this mystery of life together.
Definitely. Oh, I love it. Yeah, cannabis, we both use, obviously, but for me lately, I've been using it more as a meditation device instead of just trying to get away and space out. Instead of abusing it, I feel lately I'm using it as it's intended. And I'll go out in the garden in the back and connect with the birds that are flying around, the plants in our backyard. And I'll use it before a workout. And my workouts are like, I tend to meditate too as I'm working out. It's wonderful. I appreciate it.
The divine feminine.
Yeah. And to that point, I mean, totally with you there. I think the reason why I had this experience from cannabis, here's Tara.
Hey, how you doing? What's going on?
I heard all this positivity talk. I had to come join.
I love it.
Yeah.
Sorry, Buffalo had to get our charger because our computer's going to die. So sorry.
No worries.
That,
no worries.
We can keep going.
Yeah. So what I was kind of reminded of when you said what you just said was this feeling of meditation when I was driving, right? And, you know, I've been smoking weed since before I learned how to drive. So I learned how to drive while I was high, and have probably smoked weed every day since. So there's never been a time when I wasn't high driving. That by no means is a recommendation for other people to drive high, because I'm just a different person. I'm a special, rare individual in that way. So I bring that up because when I'm driving, I get put into a state of meditation. I think most people do, because you're focusing on the road and you're also listening to something or having a conversation with somebody, and your body is doing something that your mind kind of has been trained to do on a subconscious level. And the better you get at driving, you know, the better you are at kind of keeping your focus in two places rather than just on the road, right? At first, when you learn to drive, you're like, oh my God. But that subsides, and then you have like this level of focus on other things. And that mixed with cannabis, mixed with podcasting has been huge for me. And that's why driving and delivering, I think, was like you couldn't have one without the other. Like, I wouldn't be in this position if I didn't do that for that time, right? So I think on the point of meditating with cannabis, like, another thing I wanted to bring up is when I started smoking weed, I noticed a lot of my friends would only smoke weed in a social setting, whereas I was very eager to go home and be high by myself. And for whatever reason, that I think is super important, at least to where I've gotten, because that time alone, you know, is where I found all of the interests that I have kind of refined at this point in my life. And cannabis was a huge help in that. And that's why I interviewed Chris Bennett and read his book, you know, and all this kind of stuff. So I encourage anybody to do those same things, maybe save for the driving while high thing. I don't know how legal that is, but I'm going to keep breaking the law. I'll tell you that. I'm going to keep doing it. So,
I mean, here in Southern California, it's kind of needed, you know?
For a lot of people. More people should do it.
Right. I've never been, but from the few conversations I've had with Sam while he's on the phone in traffic, it doesn't sound fun at all. He's talked about it on his show a bunch, though. So yeah, no, I've never been out there, but I mean, Tara can agree with me or back me up on this. It's like where we live, the traffic is terrible. Like, I call it the megalopolis, because we're like in between New York City and Boston, and like a lot of people like work and commute from our state to those cities, and it's just like there's a lot of traffic, and it's not always to Connecticut, it's through Connecticut, you know.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I can see that.
Right.
Oh man, yeah, that's crazy. I'm sorry guys, I had to get the cord.
No, it's all right.
Yeah, traffic here, it was so weird. Like, you know, when COVID first started and there was no traffic at all. It was pretty crazy.
It was actually pretty nice.
Yeah, it was very nice. And now that everyone's back on the road, it's like nothing ever happened, and people are a little more crazy now and more risky with what they're doing. But for me, I just chill, you know, I'm like, I'll get there when I get there. Yeah. It's fine.
Well, I think it doesn't help here is that a lot of people we see are wearing masks and gloves in their car while they're driving. The lack of oxygen probably doesn't help. But kind of back to the weed and driving thing, I think they've proven that you actually are a better driver when you're high, because have you heard of the Berkeley study?
No.
Yeah, Berkeley did a study with, I think like 300 different drivers. I might be getting the number off, but they did a whole bunch of different drivers. A third of the group was sober, a third of the group was drunk, and a third of the group got high. The high group beat the sober group.
Right.
How is that even possible?
Oh,
What
so
does
possible.
that mean? Like beat, like in terms
Outperformed.
of violations?
Because they had them go through a course.
Oh, I see.
And the
Okay.
sober drivers
Higher
hit cones
vision.
way more times than the high drivers. High drivers were really careful.
Right.
Yeah.
I can corroborate that, and for a long time I fantasized being like the test subject for that, and like being like if I ever got pulled over for smoking weed, being like, make me walk the line, like videotape it, like so I could show like I'm as sober as anyone else is. I'm just high. Like it doesn't debilitate you in any way unless you're new to it. I don't want to say, if you smoke for the first time, you're probably going to do that. Those were people who probably are like me, daily smokers or weekly smokers, and have driven before while high. Like I've had friends who've driven high and I'm like, dude, pull over, I'm driving, but at the same time, that was my suspicion. I'm glad there's now a study that corroborates it.
We're going to have to send that to you guys.
Yeah, I don't know
Please
how
do. I'll put it on my website.
Oh man.
I will. I'll put it on the myfamilythinksimcrazy.com, and then if I ever get pulled over, I'll just tell the officer to go to my website and read up the Berkeley study.
There you go. Oh man. So you and Tara are cannabis users, or is it just you, Mark?
I've taken a break from it
Okay.
for now. Yeah.
For sure. I was going to ask about your
More
dreams.
for me.
Yeah.
Do you guys still dream? Like now that you've taken a break, Tara, are your dreams more intense?
Yeah. Yeah, they are actually. Yeah, they're more vivid than they were. I stopped dreaming for a while.
Yeah.
Because I was smoking pretty much every day for 10 years. So, yeah. And so I didn't really remember many of my dreams. But, yeah. Recently, they've been pretty vivid and intense. Like, pretty dark. But I think that's just maybe from the transition of smoking for so long and then not smoking so much now.
Oh, man.
And also processing the
Processing
shadow work that you're kind of
a
going
lot of
through,
stuff.
too. I mean, don't just be so mysterious, Tara. I mean, you're sitting on the podcast here. You got to bear it all. No, she's definitely, and I'm glad you asked us, because in the past 3-4 days, I've had really intense dreams because we've been trying to wake up earlier. So we'll set the alarm and then fall back asleep. And that's when I remember my dreams. It's never like after a full 6 hours. Because I think, I'm probably guilty of smoking close to bedtime really often. And that contributes to not remembering your dreams, because you're releasing melatonin when you're high. I mean, that not to bring everything to the finite molecular level, not that I think that's the most important understanding of things, but from that perspective, we're releasing melatonin when we get high. So we're essentially daydreaming, so I prefer to daydream for whatever reason. And some people night dream, but maybe it's because I'm like fully drained of that smoking experience, and then 6 hours passes, I wake up and then go back to sleep for a couple hours, and that's why I'm remembering my dreams. But there's definitely years that pass by where like I would only have dreams here and there, and it's definitely because of smoking weed. I don't know necessarily that it's a bad thing though, because like she was kind of alluding to, sometimes your dreams could be kind of dark, and for whatever reason, I'm better off without that. I don't know. Maybe that's wrong though, because I mean, she's growing a lot from experiencing that, and I know how important that is.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know when we go to Idaho, our access to cannabis is going to be very limited. So
Oh, no, I doubt that. I doubt that. You guys have a podcast. You'll be fine. Someone will listen and be like, dude, I'm in Idaho too. And then you'll find out that there's like a connection. So I would don't put yourself out there, but you already kind of did with this conversation. Someone will hear it and maybe get in touch with.
Sure.
I'll say it for you because I'm in a legal state. Send Legs some weed.
There you go. Please help.
Please help us. We're poor.
Yeah, I'm like hoarding edibles right now, throwing in the freezer, just like getting ready for winter.
How close are you to the Idaho-Canada border? It's very small, but there is a border.
We're probably like 6-7 hours because we're in Southeast.
Well, there's I forget. I think they made a movie out of this, but there's some kid who would like get in a ghillie suit and like run weed across the border from Canada to like Washington and like other states because it was, it's been legal in Canada for some time and not in some of the U.S. states, but now you can go between Washington and Canada with weed. I'm sure that border's green, but yeah, my heart goes out to you. That's definitely a consideration that I make when I'm considering where I'm going to move. I do want to live in PA, but they're like strict with the weed there, or like, I would live in New Hampshire, but they're strict with the weed there, apparently. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Like we said, like, you never know. Someone will hit you up and be like, I got you.
Yeah, you can put it out there. Manifest it. Have a marijuana ceremony. Call it in.
Yes. Save a little bit and then offer it in a ceremony. That's my metaphysical advice.
Right on. We're gonna do that
with some tobacco. Should we do it with some tobacco?
All the merrier. Yeah.
We should do that. I think we should.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna do it. We'll save some. We'll offer it.
Remember, new moon for bringing things in. Full moon for closing things out, right? So don't go asking for this on the full moon, because then you might cross the wires and they'll think that you're trying to end your relationship with cannabis. I don't know. Maybe that's not how it works, but we tend to follow that, right? In the past few months, we've been following the moon schedule more than we do the normal calendar, and it's beneficial, I would say. And you saw it in your cycles lining up.
Yeah.
With the moon. I don't know how.
My cycles and the last full moon ceremony that we did, I had a lot of fear and doubt to release, and I certainly felt a huge shift after that. So, yeah, there's a big weight lifted, and here I am now, using my voice and facing my fears and my doubts and moving the energy along. So it's definitely helped. A work in progress.
See, look, they're like doing Pilates and podcasting together. We could do it. These guys, that's why I'm saying you're so inspiring, you two. You're like up and at 'em with your mics and like.
Yeah, I like that you guys are standing.
Yeah, I feel like it keeps me in, and I really like being engaged.
Yeah.
I love hearing what you guys have to say. So that's why I'm like, I have to be, every time we sat down, it's not that I was disengaged. It's just that the chair isn't good for your back. Like actually standing is really good for your back. So for, when I do work for the job I I stand, I always stand. Even if I'm typing, I'm standing. It's better to like kind of line things up. And I get in a really, if I sit, I get in like a hunched kind of golem like position, and it's not good for you to be like that, So I just try and keep it lined up, and hopefully that translates into standing up straight and, facing my fears, facing things head on, and like the world, bring it on. I'm here. I got this, kind of a thing. So it just kind of all lines up.
I love it. Yeah, we're going to consider that when we get into our new place, the ergonomics of our studio, because this is makeshift. This is all like we're in transition right now to getting a apartment. That's the next step. We thought we might hit the road in an RV. Who knows? Maybe that will line up, but that was part of it, is like if we hit the road in a van, maybe we'll find a place like Idaho is for you two, our place to call home in this new world where you can make a living connected through your computer and through sustaining yourself too, because I don't plan on just working with my computer, and I'm sure you guys might pick up some of this stuff too when you get out in a rural setting. Like you might start woodworking, you might start creating your own pottery. Like all of these little things that humans have done for thousands of years are, like what we said with cannabis, meditative practices that you can tap into that make your life better, and they're utilitarian in the sense that like you can use pottery to actually save yourself some money and not go to Kohl's or wherever and get, dishware, make it yourself, or like, all the different realms that you are super familiar with. If you're already listening to this from like a rural setting and you're like, yeah, you idiots, like get out of the city, like, because I'm sure there are people who are on farms and whatnot who appreciate podcasting and how open it is. Like you could listen to a podcast if you have no internet service. You just have to get to a place with internet service, download a bunch of podcasts, and then go back to wherever you were. Like that's the kind of thing that I'm hoping to get to, where one day I have like a little bunker where I can be connected to all this, but then my house is like there's no Wi-Fi in the house, there's none of that, and it's just like a house, like what a house was 300 years ago, like shelter, warmth, bedding, food, a place for people to come together. And like it seems like when you live in a city, they just try to pull you out of your house more and more. Look at how people live in a city, really small places that you wouldn't host people at. Like I can't even visit my sister because her house I love her, I love seeing her and hanging out with her, but New York City is crazy, and I don't want to go and hang out in her little apartment either. So I think making the move that you guys are making is super inspiring, and that's something Tara and I are definitely on our way towards, for sure, and that's why I told her, I'm like, we should do this conversation together. She was busy, so don't blame her. It was my fault.
I was mapping out my recent synchronicities.
Ooh, I love that. You care to share?
Okay, well, Mark just did the podcast with Mike Wan, the most recent one, talking about they know him. Yeah, the ley lines and how it connected to the letter P, and the P's, the Palladians, have been significant to my journey so far. And so I noticed that, or I connected that the P's came up, and then in the Manitau book, this book that we found on our journey, there's a stone structure dedicated to the Palladians, and I haven't gotten into the specifics of it yet. But so for me, I'm like feeling more called to ceremonies, and with the shadow work and whatnot, kind of finding my way and mapping out my own way in this world, or to navigate this realm. So that came up. And then another connection with the Shakers and the Quakers, who I'm forgetting it now, but the
shaking Quakers, and a part of their life was dancing, and kind of like this ecstatic dancing is the way I'm interpreting it, and then surrendering, themselves to spirit, and honoring themselves and helping themselves in that way. So yeah, that came up too, and it jogged my memory how I used to do that for myself, and just within the past few months I forgot about it because I came so overwhelmed by a lot of other things, and yeah, so it just kind of brought me back to like where I am and how I fit into this whole story narrative that's unfolding before me and
awesome.
Everyone.
Yeah,
I love that. Yeah, I need to start keeping like a diary or something of the synchronicities in my life, just because I'm a little forgetful, so I need to do something like that. That's awesome.
Yeah,
it's getting really lit right now with synchronicities. Like, I'm not going to lie. Everybody's experiencing all types of synchronicities. We watch Chance Garton's Oracle videos in the morning, and he's been, I don't know what's been coming up, why certain cards are being pulled, but it just fits. It just makes sense with what's happening right now in our lives. I mean, you told me about the peacock this morning, and
the peacock has been coming into my life a lot lately, and peacock means like transformation, new beginnings, and I just keep seeing it everywhere, or someone's referencing it to me, and I'm like, okay, it's totally what I'm going through right now, but also understanding the message from God, from source, telling me it's okay, the changes that are happening in your life right now, it's okay that you're on the right, just trusting that.
Yeah, it's really weird. Have you guys been experiencing a lot more synchronicities?
Well, I would say it definitely happens at frequencies, I don't know. I mean, I haven't been keeping track as much as she has, but the books, if we were going to call them synchronicities, then yeah, maybe that's the right word for it. But we have seen this like connection between certain books that we've bought. It started with this book called Dancing the Medicine Wheel, and that led us to sort of many different things that we're now integrating. And at that time, it was connected to this whole 13 moon cycle. We were talking a lot about the 13 moons. There's a bunch of episodes on our Patreon from that time about that. And we find this book called Dancing the Medicine Wheel, and it mentions the 13 moons. So that was like the first one. And then the second one was when we went to Woodstock, and it was kind of a mixed reasoning of why we went there. Like, I'm always on the side of like, yeah, let's go for a drive, and like, but sometimes she'll suggest a place that's like maybe too far, so I'm like, no, like hesitant. But for whatever reason, I think it was mostly because Aurora, who we interviewed on our show, had told us there was a vortex of energy in the Catskill Mountains near Woodstock, New York, which is famous for the whole hippie gathering that didn't happen in the town but was caused by the town. So we went to Woodstock for those two reasons, without really the idea of, we're going to get a book, and like, none of that was on our mind. We were just exploring a place. And we end up in a bookstore, obviously, because we're both interested in reading and finding cool books. So we find this book, The Spirit in the Stone, which starts connecting these dots about what we were learning about at that time with the stones in the Dancing the Medicine Wheel book, because the book talks a lot about stones as, significant and all the different aspects of minerals, but on a more of an astrological level of like each mineral connects to you for certain. So, but this was more in the line of like Graham Hancock type research, because he even wrote the foreword to the book. So that's what drew my mind to it. I'm like, oh, Graham Hancock, he's interesting. And then in the book, there's this chapter, only one chapter, about a ley line called the Hammonasset line. And I thought it was so cool because it goes straight through the state of Connecticut, where we're from. So that was a synchronicity there. But then her friend knew about the Hammonasset ley line, which was so weird because she's, I don't know, she doesn't listen to podcasts, but she gets a lot of information from where? Facebook?
Yeah.
Facebook.
Yeah.
So she found
50s.
she's cool. She's a cool chick, hippie chick, and she knew about the Hammonasset ley line. And she's been to a weird place called Gungy Wamp, which is like an ancient stone alignment in Connecticut. It's not really available to the public. It's sort of like a crime that I was there. I was trespassing when I was there, but I explored it, and Gail, I guess, had explored it too, her friend, some years ago. So there was a weird connection there between us, her, the book, right? You're seeing the picture come together. And then from that book, we've only learned so much more that we just kept talking about it, that eventually somebody suggested that we get this other book called the Gaia Matrix, which is about
ley lines, right? The Hammonasset ley line. So I think Michael Wan suggested it, and Michelle Gibson also suggested we read it. So I'm like, boom, okay, two people who don't know each other suggesting the same thing. That's a sign. So I ordered it on Amazon, which I don't typically do for just any book. Like, it's only these cases when I'm like, oh, that's the book, gotta have it, Amazon. So I did that, and when we got the book, boom, even more synchronicities. We find out that this Hammonasset ley line is not in the book, but another ley line goes straight through where we're from. And not only like through our hometown, but like straight up through Connecticut to a place, okay, and stick with me here, folks, to a place where I brought the friend who paid me to go to the airport, which brought me to the Susquehanna River in the first place. So years ago, before I was even like interested in a lot of this stuff, not really, but I was like, before any of this became a reality, I had gone to this place that is the sacral chakra on this chakra ley line, right? This author says, okay, here's the root chakra, here's the sacral chakra, boom, boom, boom. So we've been to the root chakra our whole lives. We've been hanging out in the root chakra pretty much. And then we, both had an idea of this Barkhamsted Reservoir, which is a beautiful place if you're in the area. It's like one of the only places in Connecticut where you would lose service, like that type of place. Again, we're in a megalopolis, but it's really, really pristine and remote for a super populated state. It's the reservoir for Hartford, which is the capital city, and it's on this ley line. So we went up to the sacral chakra, and then the solar chakra. Yes. Yeah. That was the trip we went on like 2 weeks ago. And, we go to this place called Shelburne Falls. And we read a little bit about Shelburne Falls and how it's like kind of like an artist colony and interesting things have happened there.
And years before, I would drive around and just kind of get lost driving around, and I wound up there one year.
Even more. Even more layers. So let's keep going with the layers, because it's personal, so it's our synchronicities, but I think people can find the same thing in their life if they use this formula. So we go to Shelburne Falls. Now, here's the synchronicity with Michael Wan again. When Tara and I visited Michael Wan, the third time I've ever hung out with Mike, he took us to a place on the Susquehanna River where there are rocks, really interesting rocks, all going into the river, and you can kind of like walk across them and stuff. And they're called the glacial potholes. They're this really interesting sort of bowl-shaped carvings into, not carvings, because they're built by glacial deposits. That's how they're formed. Possibly some other way. Who knows? It's strange, and we don't want to believe science with everything they say. But right? I mean, how strange were those?
They're pretty perfect circles.
They're perfect circles in the stone, like these bowls in the stone. So look up glacial potholes, like for folks who want a visual reference. And then, funny enough, Shelburne Falls has the biggest site of glacial deposits anywhere in the United States. So we go and we see the glacial deposits there, and that was cool. But we also found another book, which she referenced just before, the Manitou Stone book, which puts all of the other books that we got into perspective. Like, it's so weird how this book covers all these different topics and kind of fits in with a lot of what Michael Wan talks about, as she said, with the quaking shake, or the quaking shakers, the shaking Quakers, right? They were a type of Quaker that, like she said, were dancers. They were known for religious ceremonies when they would dance and do these songs and dances, and indigenous cultures would do the same thing. I mean, one of the first sightings of like Native Americans from the Dutch, when they were sailing up the Hudson River, naming all these places, they named a place like the Devil's Cliffs or the Devil's Tower because they saw indigenous people performing like a ritual that to them looked obviously, you know, from their Christian perspective, satanic, but you know, us four don't agree with that perspective. But that was why they would name something like that, the devil's this or the devil's that, because they were just superstitious. But they were dancing, you know, this kind of religious ceremony that includes dancing and music. It's purely human. So I think that's where the connection with the Shakers and the indigenous people and this Manitou stone book lies. And you know, like Tara said, we're still exploring this, so I don't have a lot of conclusions, but I definitely have possibly sold a few copies of all four of those books by talking about them so much. I bought them all myself, so, but yeah, that's the synchronicities, I guess. I mean, I see my life as a story, and I think everyone's life should, you know, be their story, right? Yeah, that they're writing themselves. A lot of us, like you said, when you're living in that corporate life, you know, you didn't use these words, but I think you meant this too. You're not living your own story. You're not writing the story of your own life. And what you two are doing is radically changing the script up, you know, and saying, no, this is the new chapter and it looks like this, and we're the authors now. And I think that's what everybody should do is write the story of their life. And you'll find that the synchronicities are just the fun reminder that you're doing something right.
Oh, agreed. I know when we started this podcast and more synchronicities would pop up, you know, and I just feel like now that we're removing ourselves pretty much from the matrix, our usual lives that we've been living our whole freaking life, you know, I feel like even more the synchronicities are going to continue, and I'm really excited.
Yeah, even though we're going to like a little house on the prairie rural area, that's
the best place to be. That's where the energy is going to be purest.
Yeah,
exactly.
And you'll start to play with it, and you know, that's what I imagine happening, and does happen.
No, I'm the nature. We were out there in this past July, and it just felt like home. And the amount of wildlife in the area and the lack of cell phone service, you know, it's refreshing. And I can't wait to be away from being bombarded with EMFs constantly because we're in the city and just, yeah.
And
it's going to be a brand new part of our story. And that's the part of the story I'm really excited because I don't know where it's going to go, but I know that it's going to be great because we're together. So I know it's going to be great because everything we've done together has been great. And every time we've set our mind to doing something and accomplishing something, I mean, the fact that we're in our house right now, we set our goal to buy this house. And now we're making our goal to part with it and to make a better life. And I know that's going to work out too, because this worked out.
Yeah.
Buffalo and legs. I love it. You guys are inspiring.
Yeah, very much. I'm excited to hear and see how
it all unfolds. Yeah.
Oh yeah. We're going to share. We're definitely going to be putting out more content since we'll have time, and we're going to share our journey. And I think you two should hit the road for sure. It seems like you guys are just drawn to adventure, being on the road.
Yeah.
I say that because I'd like you guys to come visit us. It's kind of selfish reason, but
yeah,
I think that would be really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Add them to the list.
Maybe get a camper van and just,
Yeah.
Cool.
I'm
wake
down.
up every day under the stars.
So cool. Yeah, I love that. Oh man, this has been awesome. We don't want to take too much more of your guys' time. If you want, we can get into the songs.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Tara,
Let's get
Tara,
in.
if you'd like to share too.
Oh yeah. All right.
Send us some songs so we can add to the.
Go get.
Oh.
Could you?
Oh my god.
Did you guys hear that? How did you hear that? I thought I muted myself.
I heard that. I heard
that.
everything.
We all heard everything.
Oh my gosh.
Your songs, I'm not gonna lie, the only artist I knew of was Aesop Rock, because I'm a fan of Aesop Rock. But your first three, I listened to them before we were hanging out, so I'm actually kind of glad you were late because we gave us time to listen to everything. And these are all bangers. Like, I'm not gonna lie,
Yeah, and
all of these are bangers.
you introduced us to conscious rap as a genre. Like, I didn't even know that was a thing. And this shit was bomb.
That's all. All right. Maybe I should add that to my part of my story, because I'll tell you what, like, my father, he's definitely pushed me in a lot of directions and not really, you know, what he intended. But when I was like working for him as like a weed whacker and like using the blower, like, we would go and mow lawns and I would listen to rap music, and I just got more and more gravitated towards the conscious rap. And I think at first it was like the aggression of like not wanting to be there doing that at like 14 years old. Like, I wanted to hang out with my friends on the weekends, not mow lawns. But like, you know, that kind of grinded me into like having a harder work ethic, which was good. But also the conscious rap, like, that's been a part of my life since I was really young. And that's kind of what also woke me up to what was going on in the world, because I'm like, all this music is so cool and nobody appreciates it. It doesn't get on the billboards. It doesn't, like, none of my friends know any of these artists. As a matter of fact, I play the songs and people are like, what is this? Get it off. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, and I would have conversations with people like, do you guys listen to music for lyrics or for the beat? And like, not 8 out of 10 times people would say the beat. So I realized, like, oh, people aren't listening to music for the same reasons I am. But maybe it was because I was so bored mowing lawns, I would listen to what they're actually saying in the song, and I would have an iPod. So it was not the phone days when you can just have like infinite songs. It was limited, you know. Once I went through the 200-300 songs I had downloaded, you started it over and kept listening to them, you know. So it was a sort of like, conscious rap became like my narrative for this kind of conspiracy world that didn't exist that much in those times. But guys like Vinny Paz, Illogic, and DC the MIDI Alien is kind of lesser known, but he's a part of that whole group. And yeah, I'm glad you guys shared something new there.
For sure. Yeah, you brought up Vinny Paz. That's actually a recommendation that we received from a friend of ours in Finland that we've talked to on the podcast a few times.
Right.
That was one of his songs. And so
they are
that kind of introduced us to this whole genre we didn't even know was called conscious rap.
Yeah, it's international too. Like, they're much more popular as rappers in Europe than they are in America, I've noticed. R.A. the Rugged Man, who's been on Tinfoil Hat, I think he even like lives in Germany now because he was so well received by European audiences as a rapper. He's like, fuck it, I'm gonna marry a German woman and live in Germany. Like, this is way better than scraping by in, you know, Boston or wherever he's from, you know.
That's awesome. Oh man,
yeah. So your first one was World Wounds by DC the MIDI Alien.
Mm-hmm.
What makes you choose this song?
Well, I felt like, you know, I have a lot of rap songs I could have picked, and I felt like that album just is like conspiracy theory. Like, that whole album has a concept to it. Like, they're a rap group that hijacks a conservative radio station. So in that time period when, you know, the propaganda on Fox News was the propaganda, unlike today where maybe people are more like, oh, MSNBC is but in those times, like, that's what it was, you know. Like, George Bush was in office and he was the asshole, you know. What do they call it? I forget whatever. But anyway, so yeah, that's why I picked it, because it's very like F the establishment, and they kind of are inspiring at the same time as being like graphic, which a lot of those songs can be very graphic, you know, kind of violent, which is why I don't listen to them as much as I used to. But within that graphic violence, there is a lot of truth, and it also expresses the like real situation of growing up in an impoverished area rather than what we see in television and movies, which is just this sort of archetypical, you know, bullshit version of it.
Yeah. Oh man. So your next song was They Wonder Why I'm Insane. They Wonder Why I'm Insane.
I I love this one. This one came off to
That was
me.
good.
And this one's by Logic, right?
Yes. Yes. I picked him because a lot of people hear me say the rapper Illogic and they think I'm talking about this guy named Logic. And I think this has happened in rap a couple times where like really, really conscious artistic rappers will have like a guy that comes in and like jacks their name. I don't know if it's manipulated so that like people don't go to the first guy because the second guy comes around, but every time I talk about him, people are like, oh, Logic, I love him. And it's like, no, illogical. And I picked that because of the name of the song. And also I used to love that song. And when I was interested in conspiracy theories, it started with conscious rap, and he's one of those guys for sure. And the name of the title of that song is like the same name as my podcast, pretty much.
For sure. Oh man, I love it. Dangerous Minds by Styles of Beyond is your next choice.
Yes. And that is because that whole album is like back and forth between two rappers, like, and you don't see that anymore in rap today, where like people will go word for word with each other. And that's what these rappers did in that time and still do. You know, those guys aren't dead. They all make albums still. And I do listen to their new stuff when it comes out. But like Styles of Beyond, that guy Ryu and Talk are like the two rappers in that group, and they're just like da-na-na-na-na, and then the other guy's like da-na-na-na-na. Like, I'm not a rapper, so I'm not gonna pantomime it, but you get what I'm saying. Like, one guy goes and the other. So that on an artistic level is one of my favorite albums, and they talk about some deep stuff in that song as well, you know. So yeah.
That's interesting. At the base of it, if you think about it, it's two dudes writing poetry to each other. And
It is.
It's really kind of, that's probably the best way to battle, honestly.
Well, and it was a cooperative effort, but yeah, I mean, it's a little different than battle rap, because they're kind of like, they are writing poetry with each other, in the sense that like, I think a lot of that rap comes from the perspective of like, you're competing with other people. So you do have the everything is like, I do this and I'm the best at this, and you see that got like turned into like a worse version of itself with rap now, where it's like, I got all the money and I got all the bitches, you know. Like, these guys were actually creative with their like I statements, which I'm not gravitated a lot towards those sorts of lyrics. I'm more interested in story lyrics, or like somebody who's going to try to be actually poetic, and have like double meanings or other little nuances and hint at things. Or like Vinnie Paz, who you were suggesting. I should have put End of Days by Vinnie Paz, because that's a really great song, because it just has so many conspiracy theories in it. Like, it's just, that's what it is. And he's not like, oh, well, this song's a theory. Like, you know, he tells you what's going on in the world, and that's it, you know. And it took me years to realize, like, oh, okay, these things in the song are all real, like legit real. Like, he was talking about conspiracy theories, but from that time period and that perspective. That was a huge understanding for me.
For sure. Shout out to Ronnie in Finland. I remember when we played that song, I was so high, and I just hear the lyrics and I was like, oh my God, this is
real shit.
I was just laughing. I couldn't stop laughing. I was like, this is incredible. It's really good stuff.
Oh man. And then your last song, Boombox Apocalypse, which I don't think I heard this one from Aesop Rock. So this one was really cool when I listened to it, because I kind of like this. I'm not sure which album None Shall Pass is on, but that song has always been like, that's like the song that repeats in my head sometimes. One of those earworm songs. Yeah. So this song I was down with. What made you choose this song?
Well, I'm glad you guys mentioned your handbook for the apocalypse at the beginning, because this is a nice way to conclude, because that's why. Like, I listened to that song and the name, obviously, but also like, same thing with Logic. Like, a lot of people thought Aesop Rock, when I would talk about Aesop Rock, I meant ASAP Rocky, and I'm like, no, I'm talking about Aesop Rock. Like, he's a different person and he's much better than ASAP Rocky. So I'm insulted that you would even make that comparison. So it was almost a vindication for those two guys, Logic and Aesop Rock. because they, like I said, you know, that music in that time period helped me get to where I'm at now, you know, and his music is super, super coded. Like it's not the same as any of the other songs we've mentioned. Like his A$AP Rock's lyrics are, if we're going to talk about poetry, like that's actual poetry. Like he's if you read what he's rapping, you wouldn't understand it. Whereas most rappers today, like you could find children who write better than that. And that's not to say anything about those men's intelligence. It's just they're like in a certain art form that makes them think that that's going to garner them more success or whatever. You know, there's a whole bunch of conspiracies with that we can get into another time. But I prefer intelligent music. I mean, that's just the bottom line. And I think that when you resonate with an artist, that says something about you. So I just have always gravitated towards people who've been intelligent with their lyrics, and A$AP Rock is always impressive in that realm. And half of his songs, like, I don't even know what they mean, but I'll still listen to them and be fascinated. Like, oh, what does he mean? The mayor and the brick, like, what's that about? You know, or the crook, and, you know, all these different, you know, A$AP's Fables is where that comes from. And that's literally what he's, really creating is like these magical, fantastical worlds in each song. So I had to include him in that. And yeah, it's funny because Sam has talked to R.A. the Rugged Man, and he's talked to Immortal Technique, and I've reached out to a couple different rappers, and they don't seem all that interested in being on podcasts, but like at least the guys that I really respect. But I think that's because they found that way to express that truth, you know, through music and not through blabbering on like I do.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for introducing us to conscious rap. Tara, I don't know if you wanted to share a few songs that
I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I don't want to put you on the spot.
Well, that's why I told you to get your phone in case you could like look through Spotify, because that's how I look through my liked songs, because I don't like a song unless I'm like really moved by it. So I went through my songs and I was like, okay, I like this. I remember this one. And this is a good one too, you know? So I don't know, if you don't, it's no big deal.
Well, I don't have like the deep explanations for why I love these songs, but
it's all good.
At the River by Groove Armada, Sweet Tides by Thievery Corporation, Orange Moon by Erykah Badu, and Keep on the Sunny Side by the Carter Family.
Yeah, we sing that one together, so go look up that music video.
That's awesome. I'm definitely a fan of Groove Armada, so
Okay.
I dig that.
For sure.
Cool.
And that's more of the type of music I listen to lately. Is she's inspired me to be more on the lighter things, because I think music, if we're going to go back to synchronicity, I think music plays a huge role in your daily mood and your emotions and all of that. You know, you hear pump up workout playlists and stuff like that's, people do that for a reason. I think if you listen to songs that have a certain mood, you're going to start to resonate in that mood more. And when I was listening to a lot of that rap, like I described, can be graphic and violent sometimes, it would kind of leave me with a darker outlook on life that I definitely don't get into on my show. Not that I'm not honest about who I am on my show, but I always, like we talked about before, try to keep it on the positive side. Like we can talk about Crowley, but let's keep it on the positive side. Let's not like totally like think the world is ruined just because this asshole did a bunch of spells, you know, like, and I think people can be guilty of that in the podcasting community sometimes. I myself, of like getting afraid of something and then not being responsible with your audience in that way, in your voice. And like, you know, this show, it definitely falls into the category of positive and inspiring for sure. And I think that's like the type of music I try to listen to. And she listens to that music just because that's what she's into. She doesn't even need a deep explanation for it like I do.
Well, I just,
or maybe she does. I don't know.
I do now, but just like growing up and for most of my life, I just went with what felt good and didn't really pay close attention to, you know, what the lyrics or what the story was. So, but that's all part of the shadow work.
I set the bar a little high there by going first. I think that's all that was.
It's all good. Yeah, I can definitely resonate with that, Tara, because in high school I was like big on emo music, and it was mostly just like the sound and not really paying attention to the lyrics, kind of paying attention. And a lot of that shit is just dark and, you know, cut your wrist and black your eyes type shit. But,
Yeah, I got into the emo scene and the hardcore scene.
oh yeah.
So it was just all about expressing that rage and
Exactly.
whatnot. And then, and then got older and started to groove a bit more and just like that. And yeah, now I see how paying attention to the lyrics and reading things and letting it in, it feeds my soul the depth that I'm hungry for. Like Depth of My Soul is another good song by Thievery Corporation. So yeah, there we go.
Right on.
We're going to add these to the list.
Yeah.
Sure.
You're working references into your commentary. I love it.
I love you. We love you too.
Yeah, you guys are great. We love you. This has been like an incredible, I feel like this has been a little spiritual, and I appreciate that because we like to keep it light. We like to keep it positive, but I feel there's a connection here. So I'm really enjoying this.
We gotta do this again from start to finish with her by my side real soon. Maybe like, you know, after you guys are nice and settled into your new place and whatnot, we'll reschedule another conversation. Because I agree. I think we got real good vibes here, and I'll share the love. I love you guys too. This has been real fun. I appreciate you.
So much love.
Appreciate you so much for inviting me to do your show. And I don't remember if we were like, if I asked, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't thank you, but either way, I'm glad we're here.
Yeah. We're glad you're here.
Yeah,
I'm glad it worked
That's all
out.
that matters now. It doesn't matter what led us to here. We're here now. So that's what's important.
Right
I appreciate it. Yeah, we'll get moved up pretty quick. So I'll let you know, and then let's book something else so we can get together.
Yeah, we'll do this.
Yeah. Mark, do you want to share with our listeners where they can find you?
Yeah.
Before we go?
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks again for having us both, Tara and I. She's got a new podcast on the way. It's in the works. It's changed.
Right.
It's changed names 5 times already. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But it is in the works.
Okay.
If you want to stay updated on that, go to the patreon.com/MFTIC, because we'll probably put it there first. And that's where we got a bunch of other stuff going on. Like I said before, we did some work with the moon this summer that we recorded and shared what we learned on the Patreon. And then myfamilythinksimcrazy.com is where you can find all the links. And I hope people listen to this on a podcast app and, support us there. Listen to the show wherever you listen to podcasts or wherever you listen to this right now.
Awesome.
For sure.
Thanks, you too.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, reptilioids, aliens, time travelers, everyone alike. If you're listening to this, welcome to Expanding Reality. I am your host, Brandon Thomas. And of course, we have our amazing guest, Mark Steves, on today. Mark, how the fuck are you doing, dude?
I'm doing real well. Glad to be here for the first time. Glad to be talking to you for, I think maybe the 5th or 6th, 7th, 8th time. I mean, if we're going to count the off-air conversations too. So this is going to be fun. I'm ready to get into it.
It's just going to be a hang, and I'm really looking forward to it as well. You run, of course, the amazing show My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, which I love. That is what the title of this episode will be, just simply based on that it's amazing, and I'm way more sympathetic to that lately, and you and I may get into that today. We may not. But you also do the Alt Media United, which I am a part of, which I am extremely grateful for. And dude, you just do like such an amazing job. And we were just kind of chatting before on hand here, and we've had previous conversations. You've graciously had me on your show, and I'm grateful for that. And you've just been like this awesome lighthouse, man. And I just, wanted to tell you how grateful I am for you, but also just let you know that I'm pumped up just to have you on my show, dude. This is great.
Oh,
so
man.
How's everything going with you, man?
Really well. I mean, and that's just like a nice, polite way to not, dump all my personal crap on you. But, life is average as usual. I'm just a normal guy. And that really means a lot to me to hear that, because 2 years ago, I was just a random dude listening to podcasts. I didn't know Tripoli. I didn't know Eddie Bravo. I still don't know Eddie Bravo, and now I feel like there's a tremendous amount of respect that people give me, and I like to just, be very clear in the sense that I know part of it is because I work for Sam, and part of it is because Sam's helped me get to where I'm at so much, and because of that, I said, well, I can't just be this, guy who has a show and works for Tripoli and like gatekeeper was the feeling that I was getting. And I'm like, you know what? A cooperative is the opposite of that, because it's inclusive, it's supportive, and it's voluntary, right? So when Alex Sakaris and I had the opportunity or like the time on hand to create this, that's the direction we took it. It could have went in the direction of a network. It could have went in the direction of a production company. But I took it in the direction of a cooperative, because I felt like podcasting has been totally, and I'm not a sociologist or anything, so I don't know the official terms, but it's been very like mutually beneficial on all fronts. There's very, very minimal competition in podcasting. And I think the people who are competitive have the wrong idea of what they're really doing, because as you've seen, there's so much room for us to share content with each other, share time with each other, and create these amazing conversations that I used to benefit so much from as a listener, and now have the opportunity of, creating and taking part in them for future listeners.
You're 100% right. I was just talking to Chris Matthew last night, and we were talking about this as well, that it is this cooperative, and it's a rising tide raises all ships kind of model, which we all follow, man. We are all strong and hard on the law of abundancy, and we practice it all the time. But like you said, man, I've benefited so much just from these conversations. And that's why that whole like, oh, I'm in competition with these guys never fucking crossed my mind, dude. It is the furthest thing. I'm excited to be cooperative with you guys, because y'all are absolutely incredible. Like all the times that I talk to you guys, I learn more. It gets more comfortable. Like, and you as just people, I know that we've never met face to face in person, but you're a brother, man. I mean, and that's a beautiful thing. And I think we all kind of feel this camaraderie, that comes in with exploring these ideas, especially because they're fringe topics. And it's great that we can all kind of be, I guess, beacons of light for folks to come find, and to find people out there having discussions, not like what you're hearing around your normal water cooler at your job.
Well, that's the depressing stuff, like that's where you get dragged down, because when you're as aware as you and I are, and I imagine all the listeners of this show are as aware as we all are, and you hear that water cooler talk being as bland and as diminutive as it is, it really just like, I don't know, for me personally, drove a stake into my heart, like, oh man, like this is the world I'm in. And it's such a relief to be, with all the caveats that come with being connected to cyberspace, it's a relief to be connected to people who see the same truths. And that's not because I enjoy being in an echo chamber, but it's like really, really like, I think fundamentally human to be a part of a tribe, you know, maybe a better word, clan. Now that I say that out loud, probably the worst word you can use in today's climate. But, you know, in our small communities, in a small community of people who see the world at least in a similar way you do. You know, we don't have to see eye to eye, but I think that's what's so cool about the podcasting realm too, is like, I listened to, you know, one podcast for a couple years, and then, you know, something changed and I found another podcast and I listened to that for a couple years, you know, and that's no slight to the former podcast. It's just, you know, my taste changed, and that's how consensual podcasting is. It's like, you know, I'm on to the next one, new information, you know, and I hope people find that with my show, and the same thing with the guests too. Like, if you listen to my show and find Brandon Thomas, and then you become like a #1 expanding reality fan, I don't care. Like, that's awesome. I'm glad I introduced you to him. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to keep everybody on my show. You know, it's like it does what it does for me, and if it does something for you, that's a plus.
I feel the exact same. And that's why, and that's what I tell people. Look, I'm not like selling books and shit. And I don't put links to people in the show notes so that I can be like, only I can contact them and you can. It's like, no. I put all that shit out there. It's not even about me at all. That's why there aren't pictures of me and shit everywhere. It's about the guests. It's about the ideas. And this is what I promote and push. That's why I like with you guys, man. It's just all about the connection. It's all about the ideas, and go talk to these people, you know, reach out. If we have another podcaster, go check out their damn show. That's why we had you on, because I like you, but I want people to go hear your show because I like your show. And so that's like the way that this works. And it's only an expansion of ideas, you know? And back to what you said about liking a show for a little while, this is analogous to like a band or something, you know? So bands have a style, and then they exist within a certain, let's say 5 to 10 year window, if they're lucky. And then that style changes for all of society, right? Now, some folks like Green Day or Metallica can just ride that out, right? But a lot of times, a lot of your past memories, a lot of old relationships and things are wrapped up into some key songs and stuff, which is also why bands fall off. It's like, oh, I'll never listen, you know, to the Goo Goo Dolls again because I like my girlfriend loved that and she broke my heart. And now you're just over that band. It had nothing to do with them. It had to do with the memory you had associated with it. But what I find interesting about what you said about, and I think that a good podcaster or somebody that delivers interesting information to stay interesting is to evolve with their audience. You know, like this show, that's why it's called expanding. I wanted the verb, or always doing it. It's not finite. You know, this is a continuing process, and I grow with the audience, and I do that through sharing ideas with folks like you, man.
Well, and that's a perfect segue to my plan, to reveal my plan that in the future the podcast will be titled "My Family Thought I Was Crazy."
I like that. Yeah, yeah. It's optimistic, right? Because it's like they changed their mind. Right. It's like they used to, but now they're on board.
But now I'm like hanging out with Joe Rogan, and I'm in the big mansion and all that. Yeah, no. I think that's like, you know, thank you for saying all those kind things. I think that's why, you know, the show's resonated with so many people, because that title rings so true to people who are trying to expand their reality. I mean, quite honestly, most people I've found, and this isn't anything against them, the world is overwhelming in many ways, and it's not always easy to expand your reality, but I think there's a certain person or a quality in a person where you see like, oh, okay, this person is striving to improve themselves on a physical, mental, or spiritual level. And then there's another group of people who, for whatever reason, they get blocked, you know, or they just never saw that side of life, unfortunately. And I hope my show can be a bridge to feeling more confident in that, because you like resonate with the title, like, yeah, my family thinks I'm crazy too, what am I going to do about it? And then you find out like, oh, this guy David Way moved out of California and went to China and became a monk, you know, like that was an inspiring episode I did. Like, or maybe Sean Beaupre, who had like a crazy mushroom experience and connected with Thoth, and then now his parents are like, okay, be a professional skateboarder, we understand, Sean, we love you, you know, like I feel like that
awesome.
He is. I hope he comes on the show if he hasn't already, because I think he's going to start his own podcast soon. But either way, you know, there's so many people out there in the world, and when you realize like, oh wow, I'm not alone on so many different levels. As a matter of fact, there are people whose family thinks they're crazier than I am. now it's like, oh, okay, cool. Like, use me as the buffer. Like, my family thinks I'm nuts, you know? Like, if your family just kind of thinks you're crazy, then you're doing pretty good.
Yeah, my family thinks I'm batshit right now, so I may have one-upped you lately. It's been a very interesting ride, just a little peek behind the curtain with me. But what do you think the deal is psychologically with that split? What's inherent for folks to, and it doesn't even seem like half, I'll be honest with you. I don't know, from my perspective, it just seems about like an 80-20. If we're lucky, 20% of us are like us, right? But it seems like this overwhelming majority kind of follow this narrative or this script or this program. So what do you think that has to do with? Why do you think that there's a certain number of people that are always looking for truth and others, no matter what evidence is presented, won't look at it?
Well, I think comfortability plays a role in it, you know, and I'm a little jaded in the sense that, like, where I'm from, people tend to be on the either highest end of the spectrum as far as wealth or the lowest. Like, there's really not that much mid-range, and the mid-range in Connecticut, where I'm from, is pretty up there. It's not like a middle class like it is in most states. So I think here I'm a little jaded because, like, I've seen the disparity, I've seen the intellectuality of, like, those Ivy League universities up close and personal, like working around people like that and realizing, like, okay, you guys aren't as intelligent as you put on. You're, you know, filling this role. And once I realized that everybody's just playing a role, and, like, the impression we have of these people in these, you know, gilded towers isn't what they'd like us to, you know, see. It really shook me up and made me realize, like, oh, okay, I can be equal to these people. Because for the longest time in my life, I was in a sort of lack mindset of, like, oh, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not rich enough. All these kind of thoughts came through my mind, which creates a fear to do better. And I think most people resonate with that. Like, they compare themselves to the world around them, and then they strive for better, but it's a sort of out of fear. And I think where that switched for me was when I started acting out of love. And I think that isn't exactly the incentivized modus operandi for our society. I think our society incentivizes that fear mindset more than it incentivizes that love mindset. I think you could still get to the truth from the fear mindset, but I think there's a certain quality to, I guess you would say, agape, which is like not love for yourself or your community, but like love on a metaphysical, higher realm, sort of love for all. I think when you connect with that, you start to really erase those boundary lines that society creates, and you start to see the bigger picture, the whole, right? And it's a feeling that pushes you towards understanding more and more, because we're all curious. And I think that love energy is something that unfortunately most people are incentivized out of diving into deeper. You know, everybody loves in the sense of, like, they love themselves or they love somebody in their life. But to love the whole world, I think, is an energy that carries you towards something greater than yourself, because you're making a decision in that moment, and at every time you push that feeling forward of self-sacrifice, in the sense of, like, not that you're going to be a martyr, but that your immediate little toilings and all the little things you have to get done in your life become less and less important in the wider, grander scope of things. And when you can align those toilings, those things you do daily, with that greater scope of things, I think people who are in that fear mindset are like, what is this guy or gal doing? Like, you know, it just comes off strange because people are taught that the world is a certain way. And when you really learn to, I don't know, feel past that, I think it happens to people by accident, through trauma or through isolation or through that feeling I described of, like, knowing I was smart, but seeing what I was up against and trying to justify those odds in some way. And a whole happy heaping help of cannabis definitely helped out if I could butcher that. But yeah, I don't know. I think cannabis and love, man, really were the two things that vibrated me towards this other understanding that my family thinks I'm crazy for, you know, and that comes from like how I view politics, how I view society, how I view dieting, how I view just my emotions and how like I respond to certain things. Like the other day, my aunt asked me like, what's going on, Mark? You know, kind of like, what's new? That was the question she asked, what's new? And I was real honest with her. I love my aunt. I was real honest with her. I said, if I told you, I mean, I don't know what I think about on a given day is not, you know, what the average person thinks about. And she got so upset. She's like, what do you mean? You think you're so smart blowing smoke up your butt? Like, you know, like, and I'm like, no. I'm just saying, like, you know, you're not going to think about ley lines or stone alignments or, you know, the ancient history of this continent we're on. Like, and that's what I've been thinking about this week on Jocelyn. So, you know,
a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and then she hit me with the, well, why does that matter? Like, why would it matter to me? You know, and I'm really paraphrasing this because it happened 2 weeks ago, but my thought was like, well, it does matter. You're just not aware of why it matters. And you interact with ley lines and these stone alignments throughout your week because you drive by some of them, you know, at least the ones that I've noticed. So it's like you do this does affect you on a really, really subtle level. And that's what I'm usually concerned with, is that other level of reality that the average person isn't. So help me out here. Throw me the the lifeboat.
Yeah, exactly. It does feel, though, that those people that are out there, including family members, man, I mean, it's like this system, whatever the hell this place is, you know, and I say this all the time. I've been questioning the actual substance of reality itself. Like, what the fuck is this place, right? But one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is that the adversaries here, although they're large in number, they're supposed to be that way to stand out, to be so ridiculous as to be the obvious not way to go. And it's almost like it's set up here to lead people to this conclusion. Now, some people may play a role here, and you might look at them as like non-player characters or something like that, or just artifacts of the Matrix or whatever. But it does feel like that there's an overwhelming adversity here, and that it does take the hero's journey to kind of step into those roles and to say, man, there's got to be something more to this, and to kind of follow that and pursue it, even and especially at the threat of ostracization, right? At the threat of being thrown out of the tribe because you're a wacko. But it's not like that anymore. It is a huge switch. And I do think that my family thought I was crazy is great. And that's probably going to be truer than we know coming up, because this great awakening or this grand shift in consciousness is definitely occurring. And I think we can all agree with this. You see people that are having an awesome time with this, which are folks like me and you, because it's like, awesome. We got a bunch of new people to talk to and things to talk about and ideas to explore with a greater input, because there are more people contributing to the conversation. And so, but the people who really have their shit figured out, air quotes for the audio only audience, then they're having a really rough time with this right now. They're having a really rough time with their belief systems, their religious systems, and what they thought their solid, rigid world was based on is crumbling to the ground all around them. And I feel bad for those people, man, because they made decisions to make really hard line choices in their line in the sand, and they lived by those quite well. But now it feels like with this shift, all of this stuff is just crumbling down, man. I mean, do you empathize with that, or have you seen any of that in your experience?
Yeah, it's you know, over here where I'm at, it feels like people have leaned into the propaganda and like just, you know, gone with it, because like I said, there's that level of comfortability where it's still not affecting them. Yeah, the masks are uncomfortable, but so is their politics. Like they're totally comfortable living with that political mindset. That's the politics of it. I think people who are waking up are the people who aren't comfortable, who are like, oh wow, this is becoming a lot. I have to, you know, do the VP, and I got to get the, you know, show that everywhere I go, and get the jab, and the cooties are everywhere. Give me a break already. You know, that's kind of how I feel about it. But at the same time, you know, my family, for the most part, doesn't seem like they're ready to do Thanksgiving or Christmas this year because of all the BS, you know. And so I don't think many people have have woken up to it. I think they're just kind of, unfortunately, going along with whatever's going to make things go back to normal again. That's
Never gonna fucking happen.
Right.
We know
But
that.
and this isn't quite my forte, but what I will say briefly about it is like my thought, and I was saying this to Tara yesterday, is like they're going to push this as far as they can, obviously, for the cryptocurrency, the blockchain, the transhumanist smart city future. But I think that's where it stops, is the cities. So what I was telling my girlfriend is like, I hope you enjoyed the last time we were in New York City, because that was it. Like that was the last time we're ever going to be in New York City as it kind of used to be. And it's still, for the past 5 years has been weird. Last year when I was there was pretty nice, actually. It was nice in the sense that like it was summertime. Nobody was forcing me to wear a mask when I was in certain places, but for the most part, everybody was wearing a mask. And then like the year before that, when it was just totally normal, it was just, in my opinion, like I wouldn't know it. I'm not in New York. I just go there every now and then. It was pretty chaotic. And like I liked how calmed down it got, but I don't think that they're going to be able to manage that chaos. I think it's going to go back to that chaos, and it's going to be mitigated with these new smart technologies and watching people and pushing people into a police state. And for folks like us, I think the imperative is going to be just to not go to places like that, like to avoid places like that and live your life in the more off-grid rural areas where those changes aren't going to be so quick to affect the average rural and country town. I don't think they're going to be so quick with the 5G grid. I think we're looking at 50, 60 to maybe even 100 years before that stuff gets globalized, even if it even does. I don't know. Like I said, this isn't my forte. I didn't want to go into it too far, but like that seems to be the ever-present fear right now, and the average person has no idea that that's coming. They just see it as like, oh, everybody's been getting sick. We need to do this to stop people from getting sick, and folks in our community are like, no, they're warming us up for some huge, great reset, And in my opinion, I'm like trying to stay as positive as I can, as centered in love as I can. And I think that doomsday of like a technocratic globalist, hellscape isn't a reality for me, and I'm going to gravitate away from it. Like that's just the truth for me. I can't say what's going to happen for the whole world, but like I know on a personal level, I'm not going to feed into that fear. I'm not going to learn all about the little like ins and outs of the security state and the smart cities, because I don't want to gravitate towards that. I don't want my life to gravitate towards that. I'm not going to be the, hero John Connor who fights the smart city and defeats Skynet. That's just not me. I'd rather connect with the mountain spirits and connect with the river spirits while they're still able to even interact with us, because they've been bogged down. I mean, you've talked to Michael Wan. He's talked about this 400-year spell that they put on the largest river, or on the East Coast, not the largest river in the United States, but the largest and oldest river in the East Coast, which is the Susquehanna River. And, they quite literally took it and locked it down energetically. So that's where I've been like interested in lately, is how do I connect with these land spirits that have been calling to me my whole life? Really, I've always been kind of fascinated with this sort of thing. And it wasn't only till really recently that I've begun to understand how to fully interact with this other world that I've only sensed for maybe the past 5 years.
Well, I, for one, am going to start a GoFundMe for people to contribute to the finances of a movie of you being replaced as the lead in Terminator type situation. Because, dude, just to see you try and save the world, just rolling up blunts while you're like riding on a motorcycle, I really want to see this film. So maybe we'll start something with that. But to what you said about it being controlled in the cities, I think you really hit on a massive idea here that actually is brilliant. So I kind of want to pick that apart a little bit. So whenever we talk about choice and free will, and what I've been saying from the beginning, if you want to feed into this, and a lot of people say this isn't just me, but for my audience, we've been going on this journey for a while, that if you want to feed into that, you're absolutely welcome to, but you don't have to. Like, it's not, yeah, it's coercion, but it's still your choice, right? Ultimately. And to the larger scale of this, taking it to where there are people, admittingly, that don't want fuck all to do with anything extra. They want to fit in, they want to fall in line, they want to be a part of that, and that's fine. And what's interesting about it is maybe this is the ultimate kind of like play in your own yard kind of thing, with this idea that people in these smart cities, which, yeah, they scare the shit out of you in the Great Reset, this Klaus Schwab douchebag and all that. They can scare the shit out of you about it if you want to get scared about it. And just even side off of that, just to what you said about not even researching smart cities and learning how they operate and work, because you don't even want to be that familiar with them because it's that far out of your reality. Fucking awesome. I adore that perspective, because that's what I'm saying. Like, to this idea, all the people like us have a beautiful place in nature to go. All the people who don't give a fuck all about nature and just want to fall in line in the system in their cars and their football games and all that shit, which again, there's nothing wrong with. But if they want to do that, they're actually being provided a place to go do that. And even better, it's going to be a totalitarian regime that locks you down, that tracks everywhere you go, that you're going to be social credit score, govern me harder, daddy, right? And so it's like this idea of, well, you do get what you want, and we get the ultimate freedom because they're going to just leave us the fuck alone. And they're going to not only do that, but they're going to provide like a, like those lamps that you put outside where the flies attract to it and they get zapped. That's what they do for douchebags. So they put these douchebag city lamps all over the place, and then, yeah, just stay the fuck out of them and you're going to be just fine. It's the ultimate choice. I love this idea. I love it.
Well, and I think, there's a lot I agree with in what you just said, but there's a lot I disagree with. Otherwise, I wouldn't be like in that thought mindset in the first place. Because, like, yeah, I think that's right. We have to be rested on our own will and, responsible for our actions and the consequences of our actions. But at the same time, these governmente, agents, if we'll just simplify it down to that label, they're working on, a grid of control, which I don't think is gonna, afford us the liberty of just like, oh yeah, we can just hang out in the woods while they're gonna try to push people into the cities, force them into the cities, and hunt down whoever's in the natural spaces under the guise of like, oh well, we need to protect the environment, right? So, not that I'm like putting my head in the sand, I'm going to go start a hippie commune and run around in the woods, but like that's where my focus needs to be. If I want to live in touch with nature, I need to take on the globalists on that front. Like, how are they going to be messing with, and if what you say is true, which what I didn't agree with is like, it's okay. Like, I it's your show, so I appreciate that.
That's my favorite part of it, is that it's okay.
I don't know. I'm like, I have to listen to my mom and my family go like, oh, football, this and that. Like, they love football. And I don't like sports at all. So I don't see that as a positive. I see it as like, oh, there's some conspiracies in there. And yeah, we're going to offend a bunch of people by getting into that topic. So maybe we'll save it for another day. But yeah. So I appreciate it, and I understand why you say that, but like I'm very radical about that kind of stuff, and that's why my family thinks I'm crazy, because when the sports game is on, I'm like, fuck this, so there is an attitude of that and an element of that, and I don't want to totally turn around and go back on what I said, but I do think that ignorance is not bliss. So not that I don't want to know all the ins and outs of the smart cities, but I want to know everything I can to keep myself out or keep myself safe from whatever's coming from that, right? And I don't know, man. I don't want to, again, gravitate into the fear mindset, because that's kind of what we're talking about and why it's detrimental. But there is that element of like, where am I going to go? I was born into a place that was it's kind of like stuck in between New York City and Boston, and it doesn't seem like a good time to go and like just drive out in the middle of nowhere right now. Like, I'm kind of in a point where I want to find a new place to live, but nowhere seems right. You know, so that's kind of my mindset. I know when I was younger, I'm like, yeah, cities, I would love to be in a city, you know, hang out with friends all the time, be around people all the time, always doing fun stuff. But over time, as I've grown, I've gotten to really respect the peace and the comfort of being out in your own rural area. You know, when I say own, I mean your own as in like you look around and no one is there. You're all the way out there on your own, you know. Like, I think there's enough space on this planet for all of us to have a little piece of land that we can steward and maintain. How are we going to get there? I don't know, because it seems to me like the globalists, like we kind of said, are pushing people into smart cities and then clearing the forests and leaving all access, you know, only based on their permission. You can't go there unless you're allowed to, unless you're a researcher, unless you're a park ranger, unless you're and, you know, I'm not cool with that. I don't want to be a refugee. I don't want to be a terrorist just for going into the forest, you know, like it's just a bold new world we're living in, a brave new world, I should say.
And you're absolutely right. Now, I am a chronic optimist, and sometimes, you know, to a default, probably. But I'm going to just explore this a little bit further with you, because I think that the only part that we diverge in your idea is where they start hunting people. I do think that they're definitely going to coerce, because they already do that, right? But I do think that they're going to coerce as many people into the cities, if they're established in this model, right, as they can, of course, because that's power for them, that's workforce, that's labor, that's all that stuff. And that's why the systems in place maintain this bread and circus and shit, make it enticing. Same thing with the people that got the boop boop. That's the same thing. It's still like this, make sure you do this and make sure, and it's more ridiculous and more ridiculous. But it becomes so to us as well. And so the thing about it is that maybe that's part of this. It's to divide this mental split. And why things feel so weird right now is because the split is happening further and further. And it's not a split like race or anything like that. What it is it's a split in lifestyle choice. So it's got nothing to do with race or, you know, sexual affiliation or orientation or anything like that. It just has to do with, okay, do you want to live free and out in the, you know, nature and do more things that commune with nature and on all of that stuff? Or do you want to live in this, you know, shit city and just have everything like fed to you and all your rights stripped and we'll just make all your decisions for you? It just seems like that maybe, and that's why I got so excited about the model. I was kind of like, yeah, you guys go live over there. And then maybe all these places that they keep us out of now is to keep the douchebags out later for whenever they do roll this out. And that's now what we have access to. It's like they're keeping it safe for us. You know, maybe it's that like fun, you know, maybe they'd be that awesome. I don't know.
I like it. No, I'm with it. I think it's, you know, it's interesting being in the conspiracy, you know, mindset, and only have interacted with like an actual conspiracy a couple times. You know what I mean? Like we're really like looking at these things from a speculative and historical basis. Like these are things that we're discussing based on other things that other people have said, you know.
Right.
We weren't at 9/11 on ground zero. We weren't in Dallas when JFK got shot, but we can discuss those things and gain, you know, some insight and have greater clarity for the world that we're in. And when it comes to something like that, I think, you know, we all know what it's like to be in a city, and we all know what it's like to be, for the most part, I hope, in a natural space. And the contrast is pretty apparent. And I think that's kind of the energy trap. You know, more people are born into that disconnected state, then things like football, then things like gambling, then things like, you know, drinking in excess and you know, wasting time. I would say it's a waste of time. Just kind of like living in revelry for the moment, you know, which is great. I'm all for living for the now, but that's because I'm like constantly striving for something, you know. There's this sense of like complacency, but like happiness and joy in that, like, oh well, we're just all just worker bees and there's nothing that we're, you know, like when you're in that area, it feels like a loose trap, right? That's the term that I feel like people are vibing with lately. And you know, it's not always obvious to the people who are in it. and they have like a philosophy of like nihilism that they're not really aware that they have, they don't even know that that's what they're vibing with, this kind of nihilistic philosophy. And I think what you and I are idealists. We see the world for the ideals, not for the lows. We see it for the highs and what we can strive for. And being an artist or being a creative, you kind of want to put something out there and always constantly make it as best as you can and improve upon that, whatever it is, music, art, a podcast, right? And I think there's something about conformity that this city brings too, where that is suffocated a little bit, because it's just something about being in a crowd, this crowd that it doesn't cater to the enlightenment that I think we're seeking through this podcast, the listeners of this podcast, and through the conversations that you've had, many with a bunch of brilliant people. I mean, obviously there's a sense of like, I don't know everything and I could know more, right? I think people are being kind of bred to get that out of them. I don't know. And that's why I feel like there's a hunting down, because the empire, maybe it's not a physical hunting down, but the empire, as it will, like the ever-present empire, is never for that sort of enlightenment. They're always looking to turn, you down a dead end, so you never reach that point, because there's something so powerful in that I think threatens the very core of what is going on with these smart cities, with the empire, with the governmente, the temporal control, and that's why ley lines, stone rows, all these buildings have become so fascinating for me lately, because those objects, those buildings, these things on the earth, are literally the skeleton of our living planet. Like we both have minerals in our bodies as our skeletons. It gives us form. It gives us rigidity and durability. So we're not like a slug who can just, unfortunately get stomped on and his whole life is gone in an instant. I was just taking a walking stick, and sanding it. And there's this poor little slug on there who got sanded away. And I felt so bad that I like smeared him, but 'tis the nature of its being. And I think the earth is not at all a slug. It's an incredibly, incredibly, incredibly complex organism that we're all a part of. And I think as creators or creative beings, we can add to that skeletal structure of the earth in the form of buildings, in the form of stone structures. And I think just like our nervous system kind of converges with our skeletal system, in the sense that the pathways that our skeletal system creates are like the foundation for the other channels of different parts of our bodies, and nervous system being the one that carries electricity. It's responsible for our thoughts, and like everybody always talks about how we're however much percent water, and so is the earth, right? So there's a very clear reflection here, a microcosm, macrocosm, if you will. Your body, if you understand how it works, you can extrapolate that onto the world around you. So are we starting to get the picture here with the virus and how they've warped our sense of how we operate on a microcosm level and a macrocosm level, and vice versa, on and on and on. There's a sort of negative percussion reflection that goes on, where they warp our sense of how our bodies work, and then that in turn warps our sense of how our planet works, and in turn warps our sense of how our body works. So I think getting down to that root of agape that I brought up at the beginning, and understanding yourself on an intimate level, and I mean trusting your intuition over the authority that's been imposed on you when you were born and raised and grew up, And we're told, no, you're not smart enough to think for yourself. These books will show you, you know, and you get a book shoved in your face and a pencil in your hand, and you're meant to, you know, follow the orders and bow down to that authority, you know, when really your inner self, your inner child, your inner voice is always connected to the higher and the all and the, you know, essence or the omnipotence. And I think, you know, people use the term like the Akashic record to discuss that, right? But what I've seen in a hermetic way is like when you understand things on a microcosm level and extrapolate that to a macrocosm, that's a big tool in the toolbox. Being able to use that hermetic law was essential to where I was and where I am now, you know? So I think how the ley lines, how the skeletal structure of the planet works, I'm not 100% certain on it yet. But given what we know about our skeletal structure, I think it's very important, you know? And I think that there's a certain manipulation that's gone on with buildings where they create structures that we gravitate around. And it's like a, you know, prophecy. They're like prophesizing what the future that they want it to be and then putting it into action, you know. And I think that's what's so interesting about the whole virus thing. It's like it fits right into the climate change stuff and this idea of like an infection or, you know, and really I think the term parasite is the most important one to use. Virus, no, but parasite, yes, there is clearly a parasite here in the human collective consciousness and in the planet. It's not a virus, it's a parasite. It's this being that exists because the rest of the organism is in a state of dis-ease, right?
Yeah.
I think that's primarily what we're dealing with, and why they put so much emphasis on the idea of a virus or a foreign invader that's harming us is because it fits in psychologically to that model of authority and control paradigm that they've presented to us for however many hundreds of years in order to keep us, you know, as sheeple. But the parasite model versus the virus model, I think, brings more clarity to it, because we understand now that our state of dis-ease is not fatal. It's not, you know, it's not infinite. It's totally, there's a solution, and it's removing that parasite or bringing that parasite, you know, out of the homeostasis of the whole, you know, because its presence is like magnetizing the rest of the organism into a disease state. I mean, does that mean parasites shouldn't exist? I don't know. I'm not gonna, you know, they exist for a reason, but I think on a huge macrocosm level, there is like a parasitic planetary force here on the planet doing something. And I don't know if the only solution is to like eject it out into space or out past the dome, you know, however you want to,
Yeah, whatever you think it is, right?
whatever your model is for the world, you know. I think that is more true than this idea of like a virus and, you know.
It's kind of like the virus is a great metaphor for the ultimate lie. And it's kind of like the great Hegelian dialect, but on a huge scale, right? We talk about problem, reaction, solution all the time, where they create the problem. We as the populace, the mass populace, that 80% we were talking about responds. And then they're like, oh, well, we'll just do this. And a lot of it has to do with stripping you of your more things that make you authentic and you. I won't even say your rights and freedoms, because those should be innate. So, but what's interesting about this model is that it works on a huge scale. Number one, you lie to them. The problem is that they don't know who they really are, what this place really is. So you lie to them at their core, and it only takes a few generations to do this. There was this interesting study with monkeys I'll tell you about here in a second, but it's interesting that then your problem turns into the reaction of, well, then we have dis-ease. We have these issues in society. We have these divides against all of us, this unauthenticity that we gravitate towards. simply because we don't know what we really are while we're here, but someone else does know this, and they're the ones that put the control system in place. And then the solution to that is to then further push this totalitarian thing. So it's like that model, but on a huge scale, having to do with everything. It's not even in these microcosms, because as above, so below. So maybe that idea as above would also be on the biggest scale possible, which is everything. So the study about monkeys, and why this is interesting whenever we talk about people who lie to us about our past and we don't really know where we come from or who we are, but someone else does. There's a study done to where they put, I think, 4 monkeys in a cage with a ladder leading up to the top of the cage where there were bananas suspended at the top. Okay. Now, what happened is when one monkey went on the ladder, he climbed it to get up to the bananas. The scientists or the researchers sprayed the other monkeys that were off of the ladder with cold jets of water and just made them miserable and freaked out until they grabbed that monkey and pulled him down and beat the piss out of him, right? So then what happened is the next time any monkey went up there for that, they grabbed the monkey and beat the piss out of him because they got sprayed with the water and they could remember that. They pulled one monkey away, then another monkey would come in, and then it would repeat the same process. Now, eventually, there were no monkeys that had been sprayed with water whatsoever in this cage, but all of them beat the piss out of any monkey that climbed that ladder to get to those bananas. So what's interesting about this is that we don't even know why we react the way that we do. We don't even know what the purpose of the way that we're feeling is. And now I think a lot of folks like me and you, it's intuitive that something's not right here, that there's something better that we can explore as far as a concept, and everyone else is really not only asleep, but completely opposed to discomforting themselves with the idea of changing the perfect system that they've got, right? And so whenever you look at models like this on scales that big, that's why we question the things like the shape of the earth and shit. That's why we question, like, what the fuck is going on here, you know? It's because we get to a place in our research, and I'm sure with you're the same way. You get to your place here and you're like, okay, well, maybe all of it's fucking bullshit, and maybe they're lying about everything, you know? And then what are we? And then you're left to your own devices to figure that out on your own. And it's interesting, man. It's just an interesting model. And I'm glad you pointed it out. So that's really cool.
Well, and, you know, thank you for adding to it, because you're reminding me, you know, that little allegory that I put out there was incomplete. And I think you're absolutely right that viruses are analogous to lies in many ways, you know, and I think that, you know, everything I've learned about them is that they're you know, they're these RNA type, like non-organic things that attach to organic things to complete that DNA structure, because it's missing. It's like one strand, and in theory, if it had two, it would be a more complex organism. Thus, that is its, you know, life cycle. It goes, it tries to combine and grow itself. How true that is, I don't know. But I think when we're getting into the science of DNA and genes and all of this stuff, it is very murky, and it comes back to some weird stuff from ancient times, you know, where they're talking about chimeras. They're talking about, you know, creating man and it being, you know, sort of a weird Dr. Moreau process with like parts of animals, you know. But I think what we're really talking about there is alchemy, and how we are, you know, one part mineral, one part vegetable, another part animal, and a fourth part, you know, God or creation, or, you know, if you want to look at from the elements, you know, where air, fire, water, earth, and ether, you know. I think no matter what culture you're looking at, there's a sort of holistic understanding there as to the kind of collective nature of reality, where we're like a sum of all of the parts. And I think adding certain materials like graphite that could possibly blacken the gold that is our soul's potential to that lead Saturnian state, that could be an element here, you know. I'm not sure. I'm not, you know, again, trying to like insert fear where there isn't a need for it, but that definitely feels like part of it. It feels to me like the people that we've trusted as doctors have A, taken the holistic model of healing and inverted it, and then B, suppressed anybody who wasn't following that inversion. Now, within that, there's been a lot of great things done. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have been helped by hospitals, but I don't think that it's anything different than what those holistic doctors could have done if their processes weren't inverted and then suppressed. Like me, I have a part in my wrist made out of cobalt chrome because I broke my wrist on a skateboard. Like, I regret that. I want to get that thing out. I feel like it's, not really a part of my body, but that choice was pushed upon me by the hospital in that state of pain, and I went with it, and I do regret it in some ways, but I think that, possibly they were right, possibly they were wrong. There's like an actual experience there for me where I'm torn. I'm not just somebody who's observing this from the outside. Like, I am a victim of the medical malpractice industry. Or another way to look at it is that I've been healed by the medical industry, right? There's two ways to look at it. But either way, that thing they put in my wrist, not cheap, probably more expensive than my car. And B, like, it's cobalt, like, comes from Africa, in like a mine. Like, some kid probably helped mine this out of the ground, an ore that they went and refined and turned into cobalt, because cobalt doesn't degrade inside of it's biocompatible. It's one of these biocompatible minerals, like titanium, is another one that they use. I think when you see that, you start to understand the whole picture of things, it can leave you with an unsettling feeling. But at the same time, there's that reverse that, like, oh wait, everything is kind of organic too. Like, even the computers we're using are made from things that come from the earth. So not everything has that moral component. I think it's us as the, interactor or the creator that has that moral component that gets added to it. And I think it's important, I guess, for us to not equate that moral component with the objective when it's really a subjective thing, in the sense of, like, it's you're bringing that element, or whoever interacted with it too is bringing that element. And, I'm not saying that there aren't evil people out there, but, like, if you're vibrating on love, there is no interaction with evil possible, in my opinion. I think love supersedes that. And it even supersedes, like, the materials that were possibly created for malintent. I mean, a weapon is a great example of that. A weapon can hurt somebody and ruin a family's life and destroy people's lives, but at the same time, it can protect someone's life. It could save someone's life. And I think that's, like, the moral dilemma of our age and of our, like, use of all of these materials. And what the powers that be want is for less and less and less people to be in on that decision, because the more people that are in on that decision, the more it's going to gravitate towards love. That's why they're just trying to control it down to the smallest group of people, because they're the most manipulative or manipulatable, and they're able to, keep these people in that fear mindset. And if those fear mindset people are the people at the top of the pyramid, well, then the whole world's kind of pushing towards that way, So I don't know if I'm very coherent with my point, but maybe you can sort of back me up there.
I back you up 100%, and you were very coherent with it, because I hear you. Now, back to the medical specifically. Whenever people talk about, so Greg Carlwood, actually, and I'm not going to tell his story, guys. Go check out his show, but he just had a little girl. Congratulations to him and his wife. They're doing great. They had kind of an interesting time with that. But again, I'm not going to tell his story. But even then, the very natural, very holistic body, if it weren't for med, things would have been a lot different. Or for, traditional medicine, things would have been a lot different. So what's interesting about this whole perspective is that we want the most natural thing possible, right? But I think what we're really looking for is the most authentic and the most honest. So the problems that we have as who we are, like I definitely want to include myself in that, is going to like a hospital or something, is that we understand a lot of lies that occur there, but there's also some truths there too. But the way we feel about the system and the lies outweighs our ability to trust the average person within that system, that it's going to be for our best benefit, or that at least something nefarious isn't going to happen, right? I mean, they charge you $10,000 for a bag of saline, right? Even that, it's like, come on, it's just shitty. But there's a lot of distrust within that. But what I hope that we're all moving to is this place to where we can incorporate these ideas with each other rather than battle each other. But it's all based on whatever works best. And all of that is subjective, meaning that now you're offering opportunities to everyone. There's no one cure for everything. Everyone operates in a different way. Everyone requires something different to be healed, and especially even in order, because now we're talking about mental health. All of those things play a factor in the physiological makeup of your body. And so to viruses and things like that, those are in some people's observations, some scientists, some doctors. I think that it's, we talk about terrain versus germ. The germ theory kind of lends itself to just on its origins, on how it's pushed so hard, on what occurs when that happens. As long as you zoom out from it just a little bit, you could see what's wrapped up in that narrative, that you're icky, you're dangerous. And that's what is interesting, just to now go to the transhuman part of it, with that whole thing as well, because it seems like the less authentic they want everything, the better off they are. But we crave authenticity. And so that's where really like this split will occur in the whole transhuman thing. But also, and Jim Gale and I were talking about this, we don't want to throw all the technology out. It's not that it's bad. We could use it in the future. We're using it now. We kind of work within the matrix. But what you want to do is get rid of the matrix and keep all their toys, like keep all the shit. Because there are people out there that do want to, there are great nurses that are just out there to help. And there are great people out there that are designing technologies that do wonderful things for humanity and that don't have a nefarious end to them. The problem is the people that fund them, who owns them, and then what that they're probably appropriated for. I heard on Matrix Assassins, great show, by the way, they were talking about Dell computers and how they gave a Dell computer to all of these kids as a free computer, but it really served as a data collection and spying apparatus for the households of every individual that they gave those computers to. So it's kind of like that. It's like, well, what do we trust? We dig the computers. It's a nice thing, but it wasn't done altruistically. They gave people a computer so that they could be spied on, not to do something nice for these children who maybe, get an education out of it as well. But that it's got a nefarious end to it, which is where this lack of trust comes in. So I'm with you on the split of like, do we trust the medical community? How do we integrate it with more homeopathic strategies? And I think just really the answer is just everybody to be honest with each other. We take the best of all of it, because none of it's 100% right. And none of it 100% works for anyone. So you just get a little bit more honest with yourself, society,
Well, and that's the big, the economics topic. And it's like, are we living in an economy that incentivizes honesty? I would say probably not, right?
Absolutely not.
So that's I think one of the larger issues, but also governmente is totally responsible for that in so many ways. I mean, just and everything I've been learning about the indigenous cultures here and the way they handled, their affairs with one another wasn't all perfect either. I mean, they would fight each other, kill each other, do all kinds of stuff, and come together in great, times of like peace and like huge, like, a confederacy, as they called it, of people who came together for good things, and I think that spirit was sort of hijacked a little bit in the founding of this country. That's some of what I've been looking into, and it's all sort of new to me. I don't want to come out and talk about a lot of it, but I definitely think that we're finding out more and more that the authenticity that you're talking about, I think it's something that permeates from the land. I think that skeleton that I was talking about, I think they hijack it with these buildings to create that disconnection, and thus that unauthenticity or phoniness is more permissible for the average person, and they can get into that sort of manipulated reality that the empire creates. Whereas in the past, when that skeletal structure was weaker, people were like, no, I'm going to go start my own group. I'm going to start my own community, And now they've kind of, like in the past 50 years, they've kind of like pushed people away from that, with the whole idea of like a cult always ending up as a bad thing, which I don't disagree with. I think there's so many examples of cults that have ended very terribly. So I'm not pushing for that, but I think there's definitely an aspect of like intentional community living that you don't hear about. Like there's all kinds of intentional communities across the United States where people come together for, the common goals of just living in a place with food and happy people and everybody's getting along. I mean, and it's not race based, it's not religious based, it's just human based, and they don't show that. They never show that. They show people, in $1 million houses who are isolated from each other, and they say that's the ideal. We need to strive for that. You need to strive to be in the mansion and the yacht and the jetliner, and they never show you these people who are living excellent lives. I mean, from when we had our first conversation, it sounds to me like you have a very cool setup over there. And I think, and like that's something that people should strive for, is being connected to the land, having self-sufficiency, having a community, depending on your personality. Some people like being a little more isolated or a little more space. I'm probably one of those people for sure. I don't know if that's just a reaction from where I've grown up, being kind of in the megalopolis, as I call it, but it's like, it's definitely a lot more available than they'd like us to think, I think.
Completely agree. And I think that what you crave is the option of isolation, but the access to people when you want it. And that's the same thing that I like. We have that out here, but we live in, what we prefer more than the percentage of as if we would have to escape to it, like a lot of people do, right? They leave the city to go camping for the weekend, but they're kind of stuck there. Not really, because you can do whatever you want, but they feel stuck there. And so that's why they haven't moved yet. But then you go back to the city and then you're involved in that environment. We just did the flip flop. We can go in the city anytime we want. We do that, but it's like we get to have it like we want, which is in small doses. It's perfect. It's like I'm not forced to go. I'm just like, and all right, that was fun. Let's get back out, and go hang out with some donkeys. So we're probably going to wrap it up here, man. I feel like I could talk to you forever about everything. We didn't even get to like the quickening and the observer effect. And I just think that you and I just should do this every now and then, man, to unravel the mysteries of the universe, or at least talk about them a little bit.
I'm down. Thank you. Yeah, this was definitely fun. I didn't know that those were on the docket for topics to talk about, but anytime you want to have me on to get into that, I think the observer effect is something I've played around with in my life, and I've called it the law of attraction. But really, I mean, if we're gonna really get down to it, it's all the same thing. It's like you put awareness or intention into something, and that's it. Like that's everything you do in the world at any given moment. You're putting awareness and intention out. Like if you're not in control of that, then someone else might be. And you should consider like who is and like why you're doing what you're doing, and whether those things are helping you with those higher intentions that listening to the Expanding Reality podcast is starting to bring into the picture of like, oh, this is possible. I don't have to work this shitty 9-to-5 job, and I can create a life outside of the grid for myself. And that's, to me, the observer effect is like observing the reality that you want to live in and then getting there because you kind of harmonize with that frequency rather than the frequency of your immediate circumstances.
Mark Steves, the host of My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, creator of the absolutely incredible Alt Media United. And I will be linking all of the ways to find you down in the show notes. An incredible conversation, brother. I can't thank you enough, and you are welcome here any damn time you want.
Thank you, sir. And I will most likely put this out as a Swapcast a couple weeks after you release it. And so for folks listening on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast, please go over and show some love to my man, Brandon Thomas, host of the Expanding Reality podcast. And you can find him on altmediaunited.com.
Thank you so much, man. Let's definitely do this again, brother.
Right on. Be sure to subscribe on Patreon, patreon.com/MFTIC. You can get bonus content there or on rockfin.com. And every episode is streamed live on Telegram. You can go on our Telegram in the episode description, sign up for the chats, sign up for the channels. All you have to do is click the link and you're in. Join, you become a member. It's that simple. If you don't have Telegram already, download it. And when I go live, I'll send a message out to the whole channel. People can listen in on the podcast while it's happening. And if you have any questions that come up, you can ask me or the guest any questions that come to mind live, and we will answer them at the end of each episode. So look forward to that. As this starts happening more and more, I expect to get more questions, and maybe we can make a nice segment of it towards the end of the conversation. That's not the case for this one. So join on Telegram, Patreon, or Rockfin and support us with a one-time donation, support us with a monthly donation. It's up to you. This is a value for value podcast, and I really could use the help. I just bought a new laptop so that I can do more, stream more, and all the things, etc., etc. So follow us in all the places. Let's go, people. We're past the big 100 and on to 1,000 more.